We'll call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, February 4th. First item on the agenda is roll call.
Miller,
Here.
Rosado,
Here.
Beck,
Here.
Knopf,
Here.
Chanzit,
Here.
Barron,
Here.
Wolf,
Here.
O'Brien, Callahan,
Here.
Meitzler,
Here.
Malay,
Here.
Ewer,
Here.
Cerrone, and McFadden.
Here.
Okay, we have the necessary quorum for tonight. Item number 2 would be a reminder to please speak into the microphone for the BATV broadcast. Up next would be approve, we have no minutes on there. No approval for minutes. Next would be items to be removed, added, or changed. We will not need an executive session tonight, so that'll come off the agenda. And then matters from the public. I don't think we have any matters from the public tonight. So flying right through, we will move on then to item number 6, discussion of Batavia Public Schools requesting student resource officer for Rotolo Middle School. Just some background on this. 3 years ago, we used to have one at the middle school, or?
Goes a little further back than that.
Okay. Yeah.
I think
Several years ago, we had a resource officer at the middle school. We no longer.
we did. The early 2000s, I believe, and 2010 was the year that was reduced. Is that correct? Sound about right? Yeah. I think 2010 was 2010-11 school year.
When I had kids in school. Great. Now I feel old.
So to give you a little history, mid-90s, about 1995, the police department and the school district partnered to place a school resource officer in the Batavia High School. That went on for several years. It was considered a success, I believe, on both parts, and expanded the program to include the Rotolo Middle School. I believe that that started in 2003. Does that sound about right to you? Okay. So about 2003 to 2010, it was a successful program, but as many of you are aware, late 2000s, 2009, 2010, the economic recession hit, and a lot of difficult decisions had to be made, both internally in the police department in the city of Batavia, as well as the Batavia Public Schools. And unfortunately, that was one of the positions we lost. And at that time, the school district privatized it. And at the time, coincided with the retirement of one of our command staff officers who moved into the Rotolo Middle School in a civilian capacity, and it's remained that way in effect since that time. On a number of occasions in the past, myself or Chief Shira before me and leaders from the school district have engaged in discussions about re-energizing the school resource officer program in the middle school, but for one reason or another, it did not happen. And unfortunately, every time we had this discussion, usually it revolved around some other issue of violence in a school throughout the country. Most recently, I briefed the council, I believe, in late 2018 about the possibility of doing this again. The timing just wasn't right between the district and the police department, but recently, again, the school district approached and said they have interest in expanding the school resource officer program back into the middle school. I can't think of a better allocation of manpower resources from the police department. There are probably any day of the week up to 2,000 children and citizens moving through that building. And it'd be nice to harden that, the security posture there. And, additionally to expand the ability for us to have outreach with the youth in the community in a way that is different than it is in the high school. Younger demographic in the middle school. Superintendent Hitchens and I even talked about using an officer in that capacity to maybe branch out to periodically stop and engage and interface with the elementary schools in the district as well. And there you have it, basically in a nutshell. We are applying just as a preparatory initiative for a federal grant that just opened up through the Department of Justice. We have between now and the middle of April to apply for that. There's a $50 million grant for school safety that includes school resource officer placement. So we will apply for that. I assess the probability of us acquiring funding for that is somewhat low. $50 million sounds a lot, but it's spread across the entire United States. And we have a pretty, I think, healthy financial situation both in the city of Batavia and the school district, but we're still going to apply for it regardless. If we did receive funding for that, that would be a 75 federal, 25% local grant, and it would be for a period of 36 months. There would be a period of time where we'd have to sustain the position. So the downside to receiving the grant would be we'd have to lock in our authorized strength in the police department for a certain period of time after that. It usually is for a match of the amount of years after the grant is, the federal funding of the grant is run dry. So it'll probably be about 6 years. Any questions?
Well, we've got representatives from the school district here. Would there be any revenue or cost sharing between the district and the city? I mean, how do?
Yes, the standard cost-sharing mechanism would be in place. I believe what it is right now is 67%, but 33% for the city, 67% for the school district for paying benefits during the period of time that the school's in session. So I think it essentially equates to about, got the chief financial officer here, so I'm going to put him on the spot. I think it's about a 50-50 cost share when you drill it all down.
Okay. And that's something I just wanted to get out so that everybody on the council is aware of that and everybody in the public is aware of that, because I think that that's important to know that, you know, it's not borne by one or the other agency, it's split between them, so that way we both have, you know, a stake in that. And I think it is really important, having known the different officers that have gone through the programs with my own kids and other times I've been around everything at the high school or the middle school. I think this is a really important thing that we have to figure out how to do. If we don't get the grant, then we have to figure out how to pay for it, because I think it is really important that, one, the kids have that opportunity to have that officer in the school setting. It makes it's a very different thing for them to meet up or to interact with an officer in that way than it is getting pulled over, you know, first time they drive a car or whatever they happen to be doing that they shouldn't have been doing that precipitates contact with the police. I think this is a much better way to have that happen, and I also think it's really important that we have that show of security in the school.
I totally agree, and it definitely, our experience is that we have a residual positive impact organization-wide from the officer and their interaction with the students at the Batavia High School, and that was the case with the Batavia, or Rotolo Middle School as well at the time. So it definitely breaks down the barriers between law enforcement and that seeing that traditional role and the youth in the community.
Mark?
Yeah, I guess in my opinion, if whoever were to take this role was half as successful as Officer Howe, then we'd be well set, because he has been such an asset to the high school, and I know several students are very happy to have him around. So it's, I think it's a very successful program there, so I can't imagine it.
Yeah, fit is very important to both us and the district, and we work really hard to achieve that each time we select a new school resource officer. It's a unique position, so it's not just for any officer. Really, they have to be motivated to do it, and Officer Howe is definitely motivated to do that.
Yep.
I don't know if he'll be as good a dancer as Officer. No, I'm definitely supportive of this. I mean, especially with the cost sharing side of it. But I think any chance we get to, it's not just the security side of it as well. I mean, it's you're getting a positive influence at a very early age, and that just shifts that whole demographic to a different posture, and it to me that's worth its weight in gold. So I'm absolutely supportive of getting that in, especially with the chance to get into the elementary school level as well.
I just wanted to mention a few things from the budget perspective, that if we were to implement this at any time this year, of course, it was not accounted for in the 2020 budget, so it would require a budget amendment to implement this year. And then next year, there is no revenue source for the ongoing costs for the position, so we would also need to account for that in the ongoing budgetary cycles.
Tony?
Yep, I fully support this, having worked in the schools with resource officers there at the time. It's absolutely beneficial and supports the education program from the safety aspect. You kind of touched on it. We're time frame. Are we looking at ASAP or planning for next year, school year? Or?
Well, I think the best case scenario is we'd like to do it for the 2020-2021 school year, starting in August, if at all possible. I'm not sure we can achieve that standard, but at some point during the school year, I think we'd both like to see that happen. The sooner the better, I guess, yeah. But definitely not this school year. Can't get it done before May.
Yeah.
Do we know if we apply for the grant, will we know that before school starts?
We should,
Okay.
yes.
Because that's something then we could try to plan that out and then figure out how to ramp up the money after the grant's gone, or right away if the grant's not there.
And I think one of the things we have going for us with regard to the grant is the size of our middle school. If I'm not mistaken, it is one of the largest middle schools in the state of Illinois.
When you talk about this being a specialized officer who's highly motivated, is there anybody within the department now that you think might step up, or is this somebody you're going to have to hire from outside and then go through any training with Batavia Police Department prior to them?
No, it's our practice. So what we would do if we achieve the grant or if we get funding through just a traditional conventional budget amendment, we would hire at the bottom of the organization and find an experienced officer inside the organization, train them for this role. And I mean, we do have several officers who have previously served in the school resource officer capacity. It would be open and available to them as well. But we would select from inside. We would not hire from the outside, except for at the bottom of the organization. And that definitely would not be the officer we would give to the district. And it would be an experienced officer.
Anybody else have a question, Marty?
Yeah, 100% on this one. This is a no-brainer. This is wherever the money needs to come from. This is a primary function of government. Safety and security of the citizens is number one. You can make adjustments anywhere else, but this is the non-negotiable one.
I don't think the argument will be very long at the budget. Okay, do you just looking for approval from us then to proceed?
To proceed with negotiating the memorandum of understanding or intergovernmental agreement with the school
It
district.
would just be similar to what we have at the high
Exactly.
school, and then go ahead and get whatever we have to do to get the grant application in and get that done.
It's already in process.
Awesome. Sounds very good.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
Job.
See how easy that was? Okay, up next will be number 7, an approval for permanent overnight on-street parking permit requested by resident at 613 Houston Street. Alderman Transit.
So we did receive a memo on this on the 31st, an email from a Batavia resident in the 5th Ward on Houston Street was requesting some special consideration. Does not have enough room in the driveway to park some cars, and was making a formal request of the city to ask for a little bit of relief. Memo from staff, basically, the staff opinion is that the council probably should not grant a permanent waiver or even a long-term variance to our long-standing policy of prohibiting overnight street parking for a number of reasons: crime deterrence, crash prevention, aesthetics, and whatnot. It is ultimately up to the council, though. So this particular situation that this resident is facing, while it's not necessarily unique, it's not necessarily medically necessary, but it feels like the right thing to do for, I believe, Mark, it's a resident who's looking to purchase a home in Batavia, is that right?
Yeah, his letter doesn't have as much detail as he and I had when we talked back and forth, that he is currently renting, so he doesn't have the ability to make any changes to the property. The gentleman that owns the property is selling it, so that he's not inclined to make any changes to the property since he's about to sell it. And the resident himself is looking to buy a house in June in Batavia. So he has 3 vehicles now, and it is just impossible. I looked, you cannot get 3 vehicles in the driveway. So.
And if I understood this correctly, he was trying to follow our rules. He
Yes, and
messed up and actually ended up getting a ticket
He ended
anyways.
up getting a ticket, and he didn't dispute it. He yep, I messed up. I think his biggest thing, although this says permanent, he really is just wants to be able to say, like, whether it's a week at a time or 2 weeks at a time with the same car. It's his work car that he would prefer to keep out in the street, because then it's not his insurance and everything that he's worried about there. And that way, he doesn't have to keep on doing this shuffle game with his cars every 3 days, picking a different car to be out in the driveway, in the street. So, at this point, it's getting shorter and shorter terms since when we first talked about it. So June is when he's expecting to be.
Do you know if
purchasing
he's had any tickets since, or?
He hasn't said that he has, so I'm assuming he's been doing it pretty well.
No, okay. So, good point. So Laura, in her memo, does say that if the council does decide that we want to entertain this type of exemption, the recommendation is that we would not do it for a long duration, that it would not be permanent, and that they would have to abide by all other applicable parking restrictions. Does anybody have any questions, or how do people feel?
Is there 3 licensed drivers in the house?
I believe it's three licensed drivers.
Dan's running it. This is-
As one who sat in this council for 39 years, I can tell you this is not the first time we've discussed this. And we've discussed this repeatedly over and over and over. And quite honestly, there was one time when I think we did make some ideas that we would try to go ahead and let somebody try this. And I would describe, it was over on Elm Street, as I remember, between Batavia Avenue and Water Street. And it was, I would describe it as all hell broke loose. And every member on the city council suddenly got calls from similar people that they had the similar type of problem and they wanted to have the same deal that was given to the guy on Elm Street. And it got to be a big row, and at the end of the day, the council finally threw their hands up and said, this isn't gonna work, we have no control over it. Once you grant it, break the barrier down, you're gonna open the door, and they're gonna have, so all of you can look forward to having people in your wards calling you up wanting to park on the street all the night. And then you're gonna run into all these issues about the cars parked there and the middle of the night and people breaking into cars and people mad because somebody's parking a junk car in front of their house every day. And you're buying yourself a whole bunch of new issues if you allow this to take hold in the city of Batavia. So I just share that with you. It's your decision, but this is one that you'll come back to haunt you. I promise you that.
Anybody else?
I'll chime in.
Sure.
I guess the only way I can see approving something like this is on a short-term basis, whether it's a week or a month at a time at the longest stretch, and then the process has to be repeated, because I can't see saying you're gonna allow it for 6 months, or you're gonna allow it for 3 months. But again, that becomes to me a really slippery hill. As soon as you step on that and say, well, it can be a week, then it's gonna be, well, I wanna do it for a month, and the next person's gonna be 2 months, and the next person's gonna be 3 months. And I think we made the system itself easier by allowing it to be done online and go through that process. Now, if in a case like this, where we're gonna do that, say it's not a day, it's a week, and it can be for a maximum of 2 months at a time. I don't know if that's how we wanna try to rewrite this, but I think the mayor's right. I mean, I can think of my driveway, like tonight, I'm driving my daughter's car again because I wanna move cars around and get mine out. So that's the reality of the world we live in, is that happens in a lot of driveways. So I'm kind of torn how I really want to go about it. I mean, I feel for the person. I've been in that situation. Thankfully, I don't have 5 people living at home with 5 cars plus my toy. So, you know, it becomes a real mess in the driveway. So I understand it from that standpoint, but I also, if we do it, like the mayor says, we're all going to get calls about it.
In the interest of transparency, I had originally said, let's try and run this through on a consent agenda tonight. We wouldn't have to spend any airtime on this. I get it. I certainly don't want to get flooded with calls on this. I live in a neighborhood where this is actually a bit of a problem. I don't think we would design the driveways like they're designed out in my neighborhood today. And I see my neighbors dealing with this. This is just, I found this one as an unusual situation specifically because it's a guy who wants to move here. This is his welcome to Batavia. He's having a little bit of issue trying to get his stuff together. And there is a sunset on this at some point. It just happens to be a couple, 2-3 months from now. I wouldn't have a problem with it being a month at a time. And if he gets his house in a couple of months, great, we can be done with this, and put it as a consent agenda item. But that said, we are opening a can of worms, so.
I'm just not sure how the situation is different than any family that has a kid who comes home from college with a car. And imagine if we were to get requests for permits for all of those cars, and then to try to distinguish those from, you know, other situations. It just creates a lot more enforcement issues for the police department and/or the code enforcement.
Snow plowing.
Snow plowing.
And I guess regardless of whatever permit we have or somebody calls it in, if it snows, the car has to be moved anyway. I mean, that's a regardless, even if they have called in and said, I'm parking overnight, if it snows, the car has to be off the street.
But if they park it there and the snow doesn't start till 1 o'clock in the morning and they leave the car there, then suddenly you got a car in the middle of the street that's now hindering the snowplow.
That could happen anyway under the current.
Yeah, I can't, but you're opening more of an opportunity for it to happen when you're allowing the parking the street.
Yeah, when I first heard of this one, I mean, I was generally supportive of trying to find a way to accommodate. I do worry about, and I'd be curious to hear the chief's point of view on some of the safety issues that I was obviously reading in the memo. But I also recall that when we were in discussions of One North Washington, we were also entertaining an overnight parking permit that would be on a charged basis. So I don't know if in trying to find some accommodation, maybe that's an option to entertain in this conversation as well. But Chief, I would love to get any insight on your perspective.
Well, from a just a maintenance perspective for the Public Works Department, snow plowing is one issue, but probably more important for them, or equally important for them, is the other 9 months of the year, 8 months of the year, or 5 months of the year at this point. They do street sweeping operations every morning as well. 4 o'clock in the morning, you get the street sweepers out there sweeping every curb street in the city of Batavia. So if they have a car parked on the street, they have to go around it. We're always talking about clearing the drains and that sort of thing. That's one of the things the street sweeper does. Abandoned and junked vehicles are an issue for us, and if we expand this, and I know there's been discussion amongst the council at various times throughout the past, to just lift the overnight parking ban within the community and just let anyone park on the city streets whenever they wanted to. And I can tell you that through my experience, what you'd have, the end result of that is that people would use the public ways as storage, like they do with the public lots. We have a lot of scattered public lots throughout the community. Sometimes in some lots we have a dozen or so spots in a private lot that we share with private entities, and if unchecked, you will have them build up with junk trailers, junk vehicles, junk trucks, that sort of thing. And then every once in a while we have to go ahead and clear those things out. The same thing would happen in the street. And again, as with my experience with human nature, they wouldn't park their junk vehicle in front of their home. They would park it in front of their neighbor's home and say, well, it's a public street. I'm parking wherever I want to. So that's a concern for us from obviously a citizen, civil dispute kind of perspective as well. It does help us when we are patrolling in the overnight hours after the bars close to see if the streets are clear when we're doing our preventive patrolling. And it gives us it kind of drives our actions when we see a vehicle parked on the street after 2 a.m. in the morning. We'll go check it out, see what's going on there. The vehicle's not supposed to be there. The parking ban is in effect. And, we do receive probably more calls at the police department from people who want to let us know that, hey, Mr. Smith down the street from me, he's been parking on the street for 4 days. What are you doing? Why is his car out there? They'll ask those questions of us, so people do pay attention. And I would just so we have a full and clear and accurate picture here, I have been paying attention to the 600 block of Houston since this issue has come up again, and this resident has found an alternative method of parking his vehicle. It's not on the street at night, and he's not getting parking permits right now. So, usually, and we're very kind of forward thinking about trying to find alternative solutions to these kinds of problems. Mill Pond is an issue that was brought up. We've dealt with that several times in the past. We also have a parking across sidewalks ordinance in the community, which we don't actively enforce between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning, because the folks like who live in Mill Pond will be able to park there and get that third vehicle across the sidewalk when it wouldn't be reasonably expected somebody to be using the sidewalk that time of night. So we do try to work with the citizens to, achieve the appropriate outcomes, but this is, like Laura said, this is a slippery slope.
So you would prefer that no one make a motion tonight?
I would prefer that we don't issue a permanent permit, yes.
Okay.
So my only other comments are that I've only been doing this for 3 years, but this is the first time I've been asked by a resident for this. So I don't know how much it opens the floodgates if I've never seen one prior to this, that we've never even talked about this in my 3 years. So that would assume that nobody's gotten one in 3 years.
I got an email from an ex-girlfriend I hadn't talked to in 20 years asking me for a parking permit.
But we didn't talk about it. I guess the other point would, if maybe now he's not, maybe he has found something. He hasn't told me he hasn't, but I guess to avoid the whole, when he's been doing it, he's been abiding by the rules, and he's been doing it every 3 days doing this. I understand his desire to keep his work vehicle in the street. It's like, why not just let him rotate or keep that same vehicle in the street, call it every 3 days and put it in and not change anything, just allow him to keep that same car, but make him do the 3 days at a time.
Well,
Because if he's going to do it, he's going to do it. We have the
Right.
same problems if he's always going to be doing it. And maybe
well, he's not
doesn't-
parking any vehicles in the street right now.
You're saying he found a solution,
Yes.
a solution that makes this kind of moot tonight.
Well, that's the indication, yes. I believe he's found a private lot where he's been able to store his vehicle. And oftentimes that is the solution, that they're close enough to a private lot or a public lot they can get a permission for, and they park there, especially if it's a certain period of time.
Incidentally, the ex-girlfriend, she parked at a church. How that worked.
That's where I kind of think with this, if all of a sudden for those permits, we charge $350, $400 a month, we wouldn't have any more problems. I mean, that's kind of the purpose behind free parking. If you know that it's free, it's really no skin off your back to kind of be able to do it then, but if you charged for it, those emergency situations go away. So while I'm sympathetic, I have had neighbors related to medical stuff, and I know that legitimate medical stuff for long periods of time, and it's hard on them, and I know they do it.
And that's different, and we would expect a recommendation from staff in a situation like that, so.
Around the same time that Mark had his request, I had somebody reach out to me in my ward asking for parking, and I referred him to the chief or
And they
to
worked
the
it out.
line. So I didn't take any more information, and I let them make that decision on that.
Well, if there is no, I guess I would ask, would anyone like to make a motion? If not, I would move to table it then.
I guess it seems like there's not support for it. That's the only reason I wouldn't make a motion is because I don't feel like, unless I get some nods around the table that they would support me, and I don't see that. So honestly, it's a little disappointing. I mean, it's something we're trying to do for somebody that says they're going to move here, but maybe they decide to move somewhere else because they realize it's not
And
the place they
normally,
want to live now.
and I do understand that point of view. The other side of it is we also don't create laws for one person, ever. And that's been my experience here. Never do you craft something for one person, one situation. It's got to have, I'm also having that issue. I will join you in that because I know others similarly situated. That's where the support would come from on it. But the more that I've kind of thought about this situation for this, it's less of what I consider for me a true emergency when I know other people really have had emergency situations and they've been able to work it out.
Sounds good to me then. We don't need a formal motion, or do we? Motion to table or not?
Table it.
Nobody makes a motion.
It's not.
Sounds
It was a
good.
discussion.
Just
Yeah.
dies.
Sounds, thank you.
Okay. We will move on to item number 8, Resolution 20-26R, authorizing execution of a master services agreement with HR Green. Gary is making his way up here. This is to do with East Side, Mahoney Creek work. I'll wait till you pull that up, and then you can start it for us.
Last summer, staff met with a number of consultants with the purpose of talking about planning options for Mahoney Creek and what the different options are. Also to discuss scope and then ultimately budget numbers. We came to council during the budget time for the 2020 budget and recommended and council approved proceeding forward with a concept plan study this year for Mahoney Creek. $60,000 was budgeted in the 2020 budget for conceptual planning. So late last year, early this year, we then received qualifications from consultants to perform this concept plan. We received qualifications from really all of these consultants that we had met with last summer. So there was 4 of them that submitted qualifications to perform a concept study. And basically what the concept study will consist of, we're going to break the Mahoney Creek watershed kind of into neighborhoods. So logical areas would be like the tributary, and then the area which goes up into the industrial park. And there's kind of the middle reach, and then there's kind of the western reach, which goes down to Fox River. And each of those areas will have its own issues and challenges. And so by breaking it into pieces, we'll be able to better address those issues and challenges directly with the homeowners and residents who live in those areas, and we'll have separate public meetings. And this is all at the conceptual level. It's really inspection, identification of issues, identification of potential solutions to those issues, development of cost estimates, at the conceptual level, as to what would be involved, and then beginning to prioritize along the entire reach what the priorities are. If I live in a neighborhood, I want the project in my backyard to be done first, and that's just human nature, but that may not be the best thing for Mahoney Creek. The reality might be that a project a mile away should take top priority. So that's where ultimately that will come back to City Council for presentation and for approvals, with the idea being that this will be completed, this conceptual study will be completed this summer for preparation for the 2021 budget. And so tonight, we're going to take two steps. We're going to execute a master services agreement, and just as a brief reminder, the city executes master services agreements with professional consultants. The master services agreements contain all the terms and conditions that basically establish a contract between the two parties. And then we have task orders, which fall under the master services agreement, and the task orders define specific scope and specific costs for specific tasks. So this first resolution actually is authorization of a master services agreement with H.R. Green. We selected H.R. Green using a qualifications-based selection process. We first reviewed their statement of qualifications, their team members that they'll be having on this particular project, also their scope. We then ranked those consultants based purely on qualifications without knowing any of the cost information. Once the qualifications ranking process was finished, we then opened what were sealed envelopes in order to then reveal the costs for each consultant. The combination of the qualifications and the costs are then put together to develop a composite score, and H.R. Green resulted in the best combination of qualifications and cost. So we are recommending H.R. Green and Resolution 20-026 to authorize execution of a master services agreement with them.
Anybody have any questions or comments? I just wanted to read one thing out of the memo because I think Mike would have liked this if he was here. The city staff is excited with the proposed consultant staffs for this project and have heard wonderful recommendations from references in the region for similar types of projects, because I know this is one really close to Mike. This is right in his yard. And this is something that I think we really want this to turn out well, because I think this has really far-reaching implications into the future for that whole area. I think this is something really important that we want to get the best possible outcome from whatever work we do out there. And I think staging it to try to do the right things first and in the right steps is really the best way. I mean, people may not see the immediate change to their neighborhood, but if it, in the end, fixes the things that are problems out there, I think that's the best outcome for it. Anybody else?
Being in that ward, I joke and take pictures of the swimming pool all the time whenever it rains in Michael Wild Park from that. So I joke that's where my daughter can go practice swim. And I do know that it has effects with the park district and their outdoor programs. And it even carries over onto the walkways, which makes it dangerous for, even I've tried walking with the mud-covered walkways. So if there's something that we can do to reduce that.
I think that's the end goal. I think that's really
the ultimate goal.
There you go. Anybody else?
I have a question. It's coming in under budget. which I always like that. Is there a way to take that budget savings and apply that towards a school resource officer that's unbudgeted? And it's an honest question. We've got money left over here. Can that be moved over to the police budget to account for any potential costs there?
So the short answer to that is yes. However, we will have, and Gary will probably say the same thing, we will have projects that come in under budget, and we will have projects that probably come in over budget as well. And so it's, we look toward the end of the year to see where all of those things come out, to see how resources can be allocated. Now, this project is, the HR Green portion is the one-time project as well, and whereas the police officer is an ongoing. So we always, every year, have to find that funding for the officer.
I'm looking for this year. We can have the discussions for next year, but trying to come up with funding to get it done this year. Here was the first thing that jumped out and said, oh, look. I'm trying, Chief.
Too early, Dan. I heard it.
Thank you.
Okay. No other discussion. I'll make the motion that we recommend to council resolution 20-26R, authorizing execution of a master services agreement with HR Green.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We can put that one on the consent agenda. Next up will be resolution 20-27R, which is the actual task order for number 1, watershed concept plan for Mahoney Creek with HR Green in an amount not to exceed $52,520.
So there is, within this packet, if I could find it, I just saw it earlier. Within this packet, there is an exhibit which is titled Task Order Number 1, and then has a bullet point listing of the scope of services that will be performed under Task Order Number 1. So as I said earlier, that kind of falls under the umbrella of the MSA, and so we are recommending approval of Resolution 20-027 for Task Order Number 1.
And that's on page 19, if
Yeah.
anybody's looking at it online.
17 through 19.
The agreement for task order 1. Any questions? Elliot?
The securing of the grant funds being one of those items, can you elaborate on that? What exactly are they doing?
So this is kind of the first step. A more detailed plan will ultimately be necessary for formal submittal of grant funds. And the way the funding works for creek studies is they don't fund every watershed every year. In fact, this area was just funded a couple of years back, and we had applied at that time, but we didn't have plans in place in order to get the grants. So this one will cycle back around. So to answer your question is, we're laying the framework. We're getting ourselves in a position so that the next time the grant cycle comes around, we'll be able to apply for grants to fund projects such as stream bank stabilization or whatnot. Yeah.
Allison, just something to mention out of I forgot I had made note of this. If you look at the things that are in that task order, there's almost 4 miles of that tributary between the tributary part of it and the actual creek part of it. So it's a lot more than what most people think of as Mahoney Creek. So that's quite a long distance. Try to figure out where that's in the first quarter, because it doesn't all stay in the first quarter.
We will be having public meetings. I mentioned this just a few minutes ago, but I wanted to stress it one last time. We're doing public outreach in mailings. We're doing public outreach on the website, on social media. We do want to have those 3 neighborhoods come to these public meetings, be able to express any issues or concerns they know about kind of their area. And I guess that being said, anyone's welcome to come to any meeting, but it'd probably be most productive for everybody if they could certainly come to their area and focus on their because when you're attending a meeting for your area, somebody else's issues may not be as high a priority for you that are sitting in the audience. So we just encourage everyone to come to their meetings, and then we can focus on your issues at your meeting.
Anybody else? Okay, I'll make the motion that we recommend to council resolution 20-27R, authorizing execution of task order number 1 for watershed concept plan for Mahoney Creek with HR Green in the amount not to exceed $52,520.
Second.
Motion by Wolf, second by Malay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I think we put that on the regular agenda and talk about it. Okay, are we okay with that? Sure. Okay, put that on a regular agenda then.
Okay.
Next up will be resolution 20-25R, approving extension of employment agreement with John Dillon. Transit.
Yeah, actually, since you're still here, we have a very valuable temp that we'd like to keep on staff.
Correct?
And we are renegotiating a retroactive employment agreement to keep him on at least through the end of this year, correct?
Yeah.
And there might be some additional projects beyond that, or,
Yeah, and if you mind, I'll jump in.
Yeah, please.
Many of you were here when John Dillon worked here full-time. He worked here full-time for 30-plus years. I don't remember exactly how many years of service he had. But John Dillon is a very valuable asset to the city. In his final 5 or so years, Bill McGrath had given up the duties of playing administrator and chief building officer, and he had sent those duties over to Public Works, which then those duties fell to John Dillon. So in his final years here, he was our water superintendent, our sewer superintendent, and our building superintendent, if you will. So when John retired in 2016, he was retained with an employment agreement, because at that time, the City Hall remodeling project was pending, and the window project and masonry project, as well as several large projects out at Public Works. So John was kept on board at that time to oversee those projects, as well as then give time for some of our internal staff members, more field staff members, to be able to kind of take some training and step up into higher roles. So during his first couple of years under the employment agreement, after he had retired, John worked on those major projects that I have listed in the memo. When we reorganized last year and we created the PPS division, the Public Properties and Services division, responsibilities for buildings and facilities shifted to Scott Haynes. And Scott now oversees the building maintenance people as well as capital planning for all of our facilities. So John Dillon, in addition to all the other hats he was wearing with the city, he also wore a hat regarding the windmills. And he and Bob Popick, when Bob Popick was still with us, John had always liked the windmills and developed an interest in the windmills, and John's a big history guy. So he really kind of took to the windmills. So although he kind of worked on them, I'll say part-time, I'll put that in quotes, from 2016 to 2018, because he was focused on these other projects, he really kind of has served as the city's point person on windmills since Mr. Popick passed away. Frankly, to be honest with you, John is one of the only people in the city organization who knows really much of anything about these windmills. We are, and I'll take a little aside, we just had a teleconference last week with a gentleman out of Nebraska. The mayor may know him, Lauren Lockwood. Thank you. Out of Nebraska. He's going to come and look at our windmills for us. He's been here, I understand, many times. He was a friend of Bob Popick's. He's a windmill guy who travels the nation fixing and repairing these windmills. And we're going to have him in to start taking over that role of preventative maintenance and greasing and oiling and bolt tightening and inspection of our windmills. So he's coming on board. And at the same time, we have John Dillon, who's an internal resource. That's what this employment agreement is for through the year 2020. John was instrumental. If you all recall, the windmill right outside our windmill right outside our window was damaged last year in a storm, and basically John spent the last half of the year working with volunteers to rebuild the mill itself, as well as make major repairs to the tower. And so John's going to continue with that, finish that project. He's got a couple of other projects of the windmills out in the circle. John's also coordinating with Mr. Lockwood to have him come in And then to circle back to your point, Alderman Chanzat, we are anticipating that through the year 2020, John will have plenty of duties specifically focused on windmills to keep him busy. There are funds in the 2020 budget for windmill maintenance, and that is where that's really where all this is coming from. Is the council budgeted funds specifically for windmill maintenance. And as far as years 21 or beyond, John Dillon is retired. John Dillon works for the AWWA, the Water Association. John Dillon works for the Depot Museum. John Dillon does United Way. RSVP. So I'm not sure if I can speak for him for beyond that, but he's very, very much active.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
I would actually add just one. I'm assuming the 599 hours would make him IMRF exempt,
Right.
so there's no pension. I'm assuming there's no benefits.
Exactly.
I think at that rate, for his expertise, well worth it.
Well, I
He
think
doesn't get anything else.
for that money and us trying to go out and find people and vet them and to do the things we need to have done, it would cost us more. You know, you're paying for the experience and the availability and the desire to do what we need done.
Yeah,
I don't know how we find that.
as you might imagine, you can't look them up in the phone book to find someone who's an expert on these windmills. They just don't exist.
Well, and what he doesn't know, he'll find out. I mean,
Yes.
He's got ways to find that out.
Yep.
He's got the contacts.
Good network.
so.
I would move that we approve Resolution 20-25-R approving an extension of the employment agreement with John Dillon.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Consent. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Okay, next up will be ordinance 20-14, revising Title III, Chapter 3 of the Batavia Municipal Code, Class J liquor license.
Okay, so memo from January 28th. This is regarding a revision to the code. Specifically, our code allows sales in movie theaters. This would allow for an expansion to live theaters, things like playhouses, improv theaters, comedy clubs, et cetera. And the chief is here if anyone has any questions regarding the changes to this code.
I have one question that I didn't
Sure.
think about till we had the school district here earlier tonight. Would this allow it in the BFAC or not? At the Fine Arts Center, the high school? I don't
We'd have to create a school district license.
School district,
Yeah, I think by statute, the school district cannot have liquor.
right, and that's, I just wanted to get that out there. I
Yeah.
didn't think it was, but the question should be asked.
It's a great question. I know it would be asked eventually.
Yeah, let me give a little background here. Laura and I have, I know I certainly have, and I think she's been in the room. We have been visited now by 2 or 3 different individuals who have ideas of moving into Batavia with theater productions. And this is not movies, this would be live productions and
Comedy club.
comedy clubs. Another one wants to, I guess, also open it up so that he can have wedding receptions and 50th wedding anniversary parties. And, you know, where we're talking about, I guess I should say, can I say? Is there any reason?
Let's wait.
What?
Let's wait.
Let's wait? I think it would, everybody'd find it very interesting where
It's
they want.
close and it's empty.
One, yeah. One's on the east side of the river and the other's on the west side. So,
Right.
Breaking news?
Perfect.
What's going on?
so
trying to
anyway,
have fun.
but they, as near as we can do, at least initially, check these folks out. Everybody seems to have somewhat of a responsible background. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any real bad people in this mix. And they've got some intriguing ideas of bringing, I think, a lot of people to our it's all downtown, I'll tell you that. And it would be, I think, an interesting venue for us to have as part of the Batavia entertainment world. And if I sat here and looked out the windows, I could probably see both of them.
And I guess I'll head off the Facebook zingers. It doesn't include this comedy club here.
Hey, yo. 7 o'clock show completely different than.
Joe already posted it.
I have one thing on this. Something I found interesting, the current rules state clear plastic cups that are distinctly different. Why plastic cups? I guess is kind of the question I have, and I see that the modification would make that exempt for over 21.
Because you don't want a glass to get tripped over in the dark theater. That's why. At least that's what they do with the AMC stubs.
All right.
And
I just, plastics
question.
are
Good question.
something that we
pick
need
up
to,
on
really
that,
need to
Randall.
examine.
Randall 15 is, or 16 or whatever we got out there. They've been in here now a couple times talking to us about bringing in drinking and food into the movie theaters, and maybe just some, or then there was one that's going to be them all, but there's a lot involved in that for them, because as I understood it, one of the things they would have to do is probably replace almost all the seats in the theater, because you're going to have drop-down trays on the back of every chair, where, the guy behind you would use the back of your chair to bring down his tray, and then there'd have to be some adjustment to, like, waitressing going on in there, and they would maybe stop the movie for 4 or 5 minutes in the middle or something, and then the waitresses would run in and bring trays and take trays out and whatever. Apparently, this is being done other places, and apparently fairly successful. So, I've even seen a rendition out there of where they would put the bar and the food preparation and everything else, and it looks, they have not gone ahead and done it, but they've certainly been in here talking to us, and I think this was, Kevin, didn't we write this to accommodate that? I believe that.
We did. That's exactly why.
When Susan and I were sticks in the mud, we didn't want to go with it and changed our mind at the end.
Another answer to your question, Alderman, is that I think the color differentiation would separate non-alcoholic drinks from alcoholic drinks for plays or activities that involve under 21 versus over 21.
It was
It was
probably
the plastic piece that just caught my attention.
it was more of an issue probably for the movie theater where you have a lot of kids. Maybe not so much in a comedy club or
Right.
something like that.
As a side note, we don't have any Class J licenses currently, so the movie theater does not have a license.
We created it, but none have yet to find their way to our doorstep.
Any additional discussion? If not, I would make a motion then that we approve ordinance 20-14, revising Title 3, Chapter 3 of the municipal code for Class J liquor licenses.
Second.
Motion and second. Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Is that something we do want to discuss because of the business impact, or is it something we just put on consent because we don't have any formal anything right now?
We have anything to talk about?
Nothing yet, so consent is fine.
Okay. Next up will be Resolution 20-23-R, approving telecommunications franchise agreement for use of right-of-way between the City of Batavia, Illinois, and MCI Metro Access Transmission Services Corp. Alderman Meitzler?
A little strange airing this one. So spoiler alert, I am going to have to abstain from voting on this one. Slight conflict of interest due to my employer. But Gary, by all means, if you wanted to enlighten us on Wide Open West's telecommunication background and what they're looking to do here now as MCI Metro has purchased their fiber optics, please.
Thank you. I'm going to take one step back really quick just to give a little background. With the city's electric utility, we own certain poles. Some poles we own outright, City of Batavia. Some poles are joint owned with AT&T, and yet there's some poles out there that are owned by ComEd that our facilities are on. So whenever you have power poles, you have a pole attachment agreement. And so like for our poles and the poles we joint own with AT&T, when other companies, Comcast, Metronet, when they want to hook on to our poles and they want to run their infrastructure on our poles, they have to enter into this agreement, and this agreement basically says that they're allowed to do certain things on our poles, they're not allowed to do certain things, they can locate their facilities in a certain location, they can't locate their facilities in other locations. If they change things, they have to notify us. Before they attach to our poles, they have to notify us. They may have to do structural calculations. They have to pay annual fees. In other words, there's a long to-do list of obligations for the attacher to the utility, which is us. So back in 2016, WOW Communications came to the city with the desire to attach to our poles to basically run through town. At that point in time, they were not proposing to provide any services in town. They simply were wanting to attach to our poles to go from point A to point B. And in September of 2016, the city entered into a pole attachment agreement with them, which outlined all these things that I just went through. Really, you'll see the next item, it's many pages long. Jump ahead to roughly a year after that, and WOW Communications sold their infrastructure to MCI Metro. MCI Metro actually acquired, my understanding is MCI Metro acquired much of WOW's communications infrastructure throughout Chicagoland. In December of 2017, MCI Metro approached us, so over 2 years ago now. MCI Metro is Verizon's fiber subsidiary. So MCI Metro is building the fiber network to support what will be Verizon's 5G. If you all watched the Super Bowl, we all got to hear about 5G. The reality is that probably no one up there has a 5G phone, or if you do have a 5G phone, you probably have very limited opportunities to actually even use the technology because the technology is not out anywhere yet. All of the networks are going that direction, and just like when we hopped from 3G to LTE, it's just going to be an increase in service level. That's basically what 5G is. So the next race, and 5G also will involve, now the name just dropped out of my head, smaller cellular sites. Can't even remember what the term was for that anymore. Instead of large towers, they're now deploying smaller cellular sites throughout municipalities. So in order to connect each one of those sites back to a data source, they need fiber. And that's what this is. So MCI Metro is Verizon's fiber subsidiary. They're looking to build a fiber network. They got some of the fiber network when they purchased WOW Communications. And then they came to us, they being MCI Metro, and said, we want to deploy a fiber network throughout town because we're going to provide telecommunications services. So we said two things. We said, one, we need a pole attachment agreement with you, and two, we need some sort of franchise agreement with you. Let's tackle a franchise agreement first because that's the first item on the agenda. There was, and this gets a little beyond my area of expertise, there was initial pushback by MCI Metro because MCI Metro said, we're not providing entertainment services, which is like Metronet and Comcast. Therefore, we don't have to do a franchise agreement. And we said, okay, we understand you're not providing entertainment services, but you still have to do a franchise agreement because you're going to be working and residing in our rights of way. So we need something to oversee your activities in our rights of way. So using outside counsel and our own city council, legal counsel, we developed under the state statutes for the telecommunications side of things, we developed a telecommunications franchise agreement. Now, I mentioned right before the start of this meeting what the definition of telecommunications is under the law. And my fourth paragraph on my memo is, unfortunately, technology has far outpaced the laws in the state of Illinois, and I think that's pretty much true almost nationwide. Entertainment services, as we all know, are no longer just confined to a cable, coax cable. Nowadays, you get entertainment services off of fiber, off your phones. So entertainment services can exist anywhere. But under the state of laws of Illinois, telecommunications is specifically defined, and I'll just read the first couple of sentences. Basically, it includes things like information transmitted through use of local, toll, and wide area network services, private line services, channel services, telegraph services, teletypewriter services. Again, the law is a little behind in technology. So you can keep reading, and I referenced the Illinois statute in my memo, but the telecommunications definition keeps going and going and going. my point is that the franchise agreement only allows MCI Metro to do telecommunications. And in the very brief part that I read, nowhere in there was the entertainment services. Only telecommunications for 5G, okay? So some of the pushback that we had with MCI Metro was this notion that how do we know if they're providing telecommunication services or not, or if they're providing entertainment services? Because if they go and provide entertainment services, they may basically be circumventing the PEG fees, the local government access fees. They can provide telecommunication services under the telecommunications law, but they should not be providing entertainment services. So we put a provision in the agreement which basically says they are doing this agreement with us for the purpose of telecommunications under the law. If they rent or sell or do something with a third party, they have to notify us, and then the city, in turn, is able to communicate with that third party, because if that third party wants to use this fiber, like I'll use Metronet, if that third party wants to use this fiber to provide communications, then the city needs to enter an agreement with that third party. They have a separate franchise agreement with that party to address whatever they're going to do with it. Even if it's another telecommunications provider, let's say Verizon sells out some of their, or rents out some of their fiber to Sprint, we're still going to want an agreement with Sprint to do telecommunications. So that's kind of the summary of the telecommunications agreement. I will never pretend to be an expert of the law with respect to this area. We did have outside counsel, as I said, that worked to develop this. I certainly relied heavily on their expertise, and this went back and forth. We only came to final terms on this in early 2019. So this went back and forth for 18 months between the two parties to get to Resolution 20-023, which is the franchise agreement. So we are recommending that as the first recommendation.
And I guess I would just also add, before opening up for comment, thank you for the background on that one, because as well, the notion of going to 5G, even if some that were on the council will recall, it was about a year ago or so that we had something pushed down to us from the state that all of a sudden we were going to have a bunch of small cell wireless conduits posted onto all of possible posts, street lamps included, and there's a very big discussion there as to who is funding all of these locations and responsible for the equipment should an accident arise. So I'm very intrigued as to where this one is going in particular, and I'm glad that we're kind of holding on to the notion that whether it's entertainment or not, we need to be making sure that we're fully covered on this one, because I agree that even in those 18 months, the lines between what is telecommunications versus something else, an entertainment provision, is blurring faster and faster.
Very much so.
And so I definitely want to make sure that we get this one covered. So with that, anybody?
This is like for them digging in the right of ways. This is for them accessing the right of ways. That's kind of what this is, that they will give permission to work in the right of ways and to be in the right of ways. They have to get permits, but only for the purpose of telecommunications as defined in the law.
Yeah. So, Tony?
As defined in the law currently.
Yeah, I know. There's no.
If they go and change that, what does that, can they say, oh, well, the law changed now we can do entertainment?
I will say this, that the FCC right now, under the current leader of the FCC, he would like to open the doors and just let people run wild.
Yep.
So I don't think I think that's beyond the city's control, unfortunately. We've been able to draft agreement as best that we can draft an agreement.
Yeah, but I guess the question is, can the agreement say the definition of telecommunications as cited currently? I guess that's a question to.
It can, but we could be preempted if there's a change like that. And frankly, in this area, it's likely that we would be preempted because, these services go beyond our city limits. They run through it, they provide to our citizens, but provide beyond it. It goes beyond the region, it goes beyond the state. We would be preempted at a local level when this law changes, and it probably will change at some point. Legislators will catch up to the changing technology and figure out a way to mishmash it all together better than it is. May not be better, though.
And the technology is changing so fast. I mean, the legislation is just not going to be able to keep up. The timetables, the things that move will
By the
never be
time
as
we-
fast.
We get the state to say that they're gonna allow everything to be attached to poles, they're gonna be changing the way they do it, or what they're gonna use, or how they're gonna do that. It may be archaic by the time it actually gets enacted.
Could the agreement actually take the language from the law and put it in the agreement rather than
Well,
citing the law?
The other problem is if the FCC does what they think they would like to do, that's gonna be more of a fight for us.
That's gonna trump
than
everything.
this. It's gonna take over everything.
Yeah.
So, Dan?
Are these enforceable, or is there a question of enforceability on the agreements?
Well, there's always,
Enforceable today?
yeah, I think so.
And I'm just thinking it's too early. There's not been a court challenge to these kinds of things, and
There've
We
been
have-
challenges around the country on various issues with these, yeah. One of the big issues is when somebody comes in to site facilities and there is a delay in processing permits or an undue delay or a rejection of a permit, though that's where the court cases come.
And if I can jump in real quick, there's almost 3 separate things here. There's a franchise agreement that kind of terms and conditions for work in the right of way. There's a pole attachment agreement for terms and conditions for attaching to our poles. And then there's this third area of actually location of the small cell wireless and deployment of the small cell wireless, which really is in many ways, we've been preempted on by the state and federal laws.
Right.
So there's kind of 3 things going on there.
it's a good thing we've never had an issue on one of our right-of-ways.
With that third part that you mentioned, right now we as you mentioned, there's a fee for allowing another party to use the poles that are owned by the city. Right? There's also the cable tax that is applied to cable services for entertainment purposes. With the small cell wireless, are we able to, and I guess this is more a question perhaps towards Kevin, are we able to look at a tax that is going to be for those facilities on our street lamps, our telephone poles, et cetera?
Yeah, we're limited in what we can collect. So that's limited by state law. We have zoning authority if it's outside of our right-of-way, but inside our right-of-way, our ability to control them is really pretty much prescripted. And we have to stay within the prescription now that we're given, the scope of authority that we have, and it's, fairly controlled or limited.
So these actions tonight, presuming council approves both of these documents, will essentially clear the way for Verizon to begin deploying their fiber network, which will then be the precursor to them deploying their 5G network. You haven't seen it from other companies yet because the other companies don't have that fiber backbone in place here. They're going to kind of have to go through the same process.
Are the boxes pretty, at least?
No. Any other questions?
Can they be red and gold, at least?
You can ask.
Elliot.
Oh, sorry, Mark.
So just a comment though, because on that third part with putting up the small cell wireless, I think what I recall is our only recourse on this is aesthetics. And we never really talked about it before, but I think we need to come up with something now that there's something on the horizon that says the control of what these things look like.
Right.
Because they're ugly if you don't do anything about it.
Yes.
So I would like to have that discussion about what are we looking for or what others have done and have been acceptable.
We need to circle back to Scott because I know
Yes.
we already did some of that.
He's planning on bringing
Yeah.
Okay.
that back. But,
Okay.
like you say, this prompts it being done sooner rather
Yes,
than later.
exactly. Yeah.
Anyone else? Anybody care to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Abstained. Okay. Next one, Resolution 20-024-R, approving pole attachment licensing agreement between the City of Batavia, Illinois and MCI Metro Access Transmission Services Corp. I don't know
Just
if we
to
have too much more to say
clarify-
on this, but please.
Just to clarify, do we want the previous one on consent or regular agenda?
can't because you were.
Oh, abstain has to be on a regular agenda.
Yep.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. That's what I do.
So one less thing for me to read.
Yeah, two less, because there's two of them.
Okay, so 20-024. Flashback in time there for a second. Verizon did not necessarily want to, MCI Metro, did not really want to accept terms and conditions for pole attachments with the city of Batavia. They have their own pole attachment agreement. They would like to have their own rules. They would like to have their own permitting requirements and fee requirements, and they would like to have everything on their own. Okay, and they were adamant about that and had dug in pretty hard very early on in the process. Right up to the point where they acquired, when we knew this, but right up to the point where they acquired WOW's infrastructure, and as part of their acquisition of WOW's infrastructure, the pole attachment agreement said that anyone who subsequently acquires the infrastructure, thou shalt assume the terms of the pole attachment agreement. So we basically spent the next still 12+ months going back and forth with them, wanting to renegotiate the pole attachment agreement, and us holding fast to say, we are not going to renegotiate this pole attachment agreement. This pole attachment agreement is established on purpose and purposefully, and you guys have to assume this agreement. That's the terms and conditions of it. And so in the end, we finally now have got them to accept all the terms and conditions of the pole attachment agreement. The only changes that are made to it are to reflect things like the change in company name, now that MCI took over from WOW, and things like notifications we send to a different address. So the pole attachment agreement before you contains all the terms and conditions that we had with WOW that we approved in 2016. It is essentially a model of what we approved with Metronet. Metronet made one or two tweaks, as you might expect in a large agreement, but on the whole, 99% of it is consistent with what we have with Metronet. I won't comment tonight on what we have with Comcast. That's a whole separate saga. But so I am recommending 20-024, which is the pole attachment agreement with MCI Metro Access Transmission Services.
Any questions on this one? Comments? Not? Anybody want to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And I abstain. Thanks, Gary.
Regular agenda. Next up is the discussion on the new entryway signage design.
From the ashes of Valhalla, Norse tale has arisen. So this is regarding, everyone knows the background on how we designed the logo and the timeline on that. Now we're going to be discussing the 6 entryway signs at the various gateways, and we have several questions that are laid out that I will let Griffin go through. Questions?
Hello, everybody. Give me 1 second here to properly adjust this. So as put in here, this has been a long time coming, and we now have a logo to display here. So what we have is the quote in 2019, and so we may have to revisit that depending on the direction that everybody wants to go, but it's just to give you a baseline. What you would be looking at now would be the closest to that quote, this would be an example of a stucco application. And then we've included just some other creative outlets if you guys want to go an alternative route. So we're looking for feedback at this point. We can present you with some more designs, different colors, etc. But we want to make sure that it's looking as good as possible. So that was the first one there. That is the second one. Third one. Say fourth one. And we don't have to go with any of these directions either. So just kind of looking for feedback. Obviously, this is a great statement and something to beautify the town. So just want to make sure we get it right.
Can you scroll through those changes again? Or
Yeah.
the different?
Slower so Mark can get. Do we have to go with that logo? Is that?
You want to talk about the logo again?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
I want to change the logo just a little.
Are we married to that?
Just
Make the inverse.
Let me marinate on it a little bit. You know what?
Yeah, for sure. That looks
That second one, would that be like metal or?
Yeah, there's different kinds of metal that you can use that are pretty weather resistant. So I would imagine that'd be part metal, part stucco. Once again, once a direction is picked, then we can price it out more accurately and figure out what that would be. But what's kind of nice, once again, is it's adaptive enough that you can do it in color. We can do it, with this shadow where it's transparent. We can do a black and white application. So it's really up to you guys on what you think is going to look best.
I'll say on the second one, I think that the background around the windmill, the logo, will disappear at different times depending on what's behind it.
How's that?
Because of
A cloudy day.
in a cloudy day, the gray will just disappear. I went through a lot longer logo design and sign design one time with the church, and it really came down to you have to have colors at the opposite end of the spectrum when you do a
Your
sign.
eye level when you're driving.
Because you will lose things in the sign depending on what the background colors are or what the letter colors are. Because you're on a quick view of seconds looking at a sign like that, driving at 30 miles an hour or more, you lose the ability to discern that quickly.
Yeah.
But what's important? Is it the logo, or is it going to be Welcome to Batavia?
On them all to match.
Mm-hmm.
So that no matter which way you come into town, it looks the same. The sign looks the same.
Amen.
I just feel like with the color, it adds more cost.
Not necessarily.
No?
It's materials that are the cost.
Yeah, it kind of depends how they apply it. Some of these things, yeah, it's way more the material than it is how they apply it. Let's see what it says here.
What are your thoughts on the multicolor version versus something more simple and just a two-color contrast?
I like some.
I think the
Who's that a little?
I think the simpler one, the two color, like that's last one there is my favorite. And I think what it ends up doing is there were enough comments out there about cartoonish, too colorful, that kind of stuff, and that takes it away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, okay, there's none of that. And
Mhm.
it's plain, it's simple, it's stronger, I think, by being just that two colored black.
They are in order of most expensive, you realize. That's
Yeah, I like that one too, but
The
I
3 and
worry that if
4.
we go with man-made materials, that one will look the least authentic. So
The last one?
the last one.
If it's not man-made, it will.
If we could do that all in Flagstone, then that would be
then
something, but
go
that's,
for
the price on that is gonna
Yeah.
be through the roof.
Just a history note, the established 1833 is pretty significant to put that on there, given the perspective that there's only one other place that's ahead of us in that area, and that's Naperville. They're 1831. And the city of Chicago is 1833 too. So we're about as old as you can get. And, I think we should be proud of that and advertise it. I mean, I think it speaks well to how long this town's held together and put itself out there, so.
I'm okay with either one of the last two.
I'm okay with any one of the last three. I for whatever reason, the color one on the entry signs is just not screaming that we need that there. I think the simpler is better for the entryway signs. I think especially if you're literally we were just talking about driving past, it's almost overload. You know, I think simpler is going to leave a lasting image better. I kind of hear what you're saying there about, you know, the considering the contrast colors, and I was thinking specifically about what you had said before when we were discussing what the logo ought to look like, about the dark background with the white popping as opposed to the inverse. So I think I'm good with any one of the last three.
Even if this is too outlandish here, this is kind of neat as well, having it with that two color. It does make Batavia a little stronger looking. In the text, we don't have to, you know, put something like this, and it doesn't have to be, you know, metal. But that's an avenue to explore if you'd like to see other options with that as well.
What about the flagstone or the lime stone, like the last part? That. Of that with the windmill with the.
I do like that the best, but I recognize that.
But if you just have the windmill and the stone with number 2.
Yeah.
So instead of the metal, that part would be the flagstone.
Yeah. Yeah. Have the stone as opposed
You
to the
cut
metal.
the stone cost in about a third.
And would you need the columns on the other side then, if it was just, you know, a big flagstone with the logo imprinted and then welcome to Batavia?
Yeah, I think the columns kind of take away from the logo and the welcome.
Yeah.
Those are the base with the sign.
What would the background be? Like the brown that we're seeing in would that be metal? Would that be wood?
That's like what a stucco design would be. So it's
Weather
cheap,
resistant.
but it also, you know, it's just, it kind of like drywall, you know, if you will.
So you were saying use stone versus steel on the left-hand side of that version.
Yeah.
And then see what it would look like standing alone without the two limestone pillars on the outside.
Or
Just
have it come
compare
down
that.
a little bit.
Proportionate, I think, when you look at the first one, because it's a little bit higher in the sign, it doesn't look like it's towers on each side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Towers
if you
came
shrunk
down.
I hate that we're sitting here designing this by committee again.
Well, also something,
It makes my head hurt every time I saw that come up, and I'm like, we're gonna
Doesn't
end
matter
up
what you
talking
put
this
out
out,
there.
it's gonna drive me nuts.
Would you like to appoint a super secret subcommittee?
Maybe we should call Scott.
No.
Do you think that that staff, we have enough feedback from the two-sided and try to utilize natural stone on one side, show you something that is just a base with the sign above it versus having the limestone columns, and play with those concepts and come back to you
Yeah.
with some more ideas?
Yeah.
Too, if we were to shrink that a little, you know, the columns down a little bit, if there was a way to do that,
Make the columns proportional to
make them more
how the
proportional
height
to
of the
it, maybe reduce some of the cost in that, and then get more of the signs done, or, you know, a different material for the background of the logo. I think what we'd want,
Yeah, and I think
what it sounds like.
one more thing with the towers too, then I think about it more, is without the towers kind of add, forgive me for however this comes across, but it can be pretentious. That it's like, look at it,
Yep.
look at us, look at our big sign.
Yeah.
Where if you take those out, it's a little simpler design. It's more about Batavia being,
Yeah.
hey, we're the Everman's town, and leave it that way.
As much as we want to flex our.
No, those are all the other signs in town that take up that.
So just for some clarification, so I don't know if anyone's mentioned this yet, but I think bringing back some quotes on different materials, just the cost difference there, as well as some different avenues with the alternate color form as you see there. And then do we want to see designs that are a little more untraditional, or do you want to keep everything very, you know, this is a sign, it's too simple? What were the thoughts on that?
I say
Lasers.
laser light show. I would say
Fountain.
simple. I would say simple.
I like the limestone in it. I like the limestone look of it.
Yeah.
I think that's really the history of this town. And, you know, just to have the new logo out there on matching signs, wherever we put them, means so much more than how big they are, how wild they look, how colorful they are. Just to have everything updated into this century and decade.
I think you have a new logo on an old material, and it keeps it simple.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And do we care for this this bend here? Does this matter to anybody?
Now that it's not blue and kind of river-like, it's okay.
We could go back to the arch. Arch. Then there would be a place to hide the lights.
Yes! You could have an arch around it with the lights beaming down on it.
I'm going to regret saying that.
I love it.
All right, given the feedback, that's enough to go off of to bring some stuff back to you guys. So I'll report on it later, and we can move forward with something then.
Did you think we were going to keep you this busy when you signed up to come here?
Oh, I did. I remember my first week here, the mayor told me, he goes, "It has never been busier in the entire time I have been mayor than now." And then I checked back in with him like 6 months later. I'm like, "Mayor, it's getting busier again since I've been here." He's like, "I know." He's like, "Things are happening." I'm like, "Oh boy." So it's been great though. And we're blessed with a wonderful staff and a good council here. Honestly, it's fantastic.
So while Griffin is up there, I just wanted to mention that he recently met with the new executive director from Main Street, and the two of them talked about utilizing our new branding in wayfinding signage in our downtown, which is part of our strategic plan and improving the walkability of our downtown and being able to direct folks to all of the cool attractions that we have in our downtown.
I think there was a couple other questions regarding lighting and going with 6 or 8, but I think those may be dependent on if there's additional cost savings
Right.
or different things to consider, that we would just address those at that time.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right.
You want to talk about it, Abby?
Oh, yeah. There we go.
This is the Abby connection that
Oompa.
the mayor handed out, if everybody doesn't
Yes.
know that.
That's my grandpa.
That was grandfather.
Got those original signs funded and
Got all of those signs funded, and he is the originator of Batavia Access,
Yep.
which was the start of, funding the toy drive, or not funding, but
The toy drive,
Toy
BATV. I mean, there was a lot of things.
so
that
many
came out of
things
that.
are Batavia Access, so it's a wonderful story.
Since Jeff wasn't here, I might have mentioned that.
No, it's great. Story by Arlene.
Okay. Yeah. Windmill News.
Amen.
There's an old one.
My first employer.
Okay. See, again, 2 degrees of separation, Batavia.
Just two.
Okay, now we will move on to discussion amending the city liquor code to allow city officials to obtain liquor licenses for establishments within the city. Alderman Jansen.
Got that. So we received a couple of memos, January 30th, one from the mayor and then one from legal counsel regarding changes to codes that we can entertain. The memo from the mayor noted that Abby had approached him to say that there was an opportunity for a redevelopment plan at the address 101 South Batavia Avenue. It's currently a liquor store that's at the intersection of First Street and Batavia Avenue. The owner there is retiring, and Abby's family is seeking to redevelop that property into a restaurant that would also sell liquor. They're looking to start that sometime this spring. So state law was recently changed to allow local officials to obtain these licenses, but there is a disconnect because currently Batavia Code actually prohibits that. So that is up for discussion tonight. And then, Kevin, do you have anything you can expand on with the memo that you sent to give us some direction for how to handle our discussion tonight?
So our code even went beyond what the previous law said, and it prohibits not just council members and the mayor. It prohibits department heads. It prohibits employees, and it prohibits any of those who have spouses who might have a direct or indirect interest in the sale, manufacture, or distribution of liquor. The current state law generally prohibits council and mayor from having a direct interest. But there's an exception for cities under 55,000 or less, so that would apply to the city of Batavia. And the exception would allow an elected official to have a direct interest, which might be a liquor license, subject to the same conditions that anyone else faces in terms of applying for a liquor license and observing the laws that go with it, but also with a couple of added conditions, one of them being that such a person could not participate in any discussion of liquor matters at all. So if you've got a liquor license and you're on the council, you can't participate in discussions of liquor matters, which would, the way it reads, it really, I think, addresses discussions in and decisions which would come formally before the council, so at a committee of the whole meeting or at a council meeting. And there was another condition too, and I printed my memo out and I didn't bring it with me, so I can't remember the other condition.
If it's incidental to selling
Yeah,
food.
it can't be a tavern license where it's only alcohol.
It's got to be ancillary to the service of food, right? So food would have to be the primary and liquor would be secondary to that. That's right, thank you.
Can you go back to the part on recusal? You mean we literally would have to leave the dais
Well,
to discuss a liquor license?
it's a little bit different than a conflict of interest. So conflict of interest, if there's a true statutory conflict of interest, it's not enough simply to refrain from participating and refrain from voting, because a vote can be counted. Actually, votes, it's complicated. But if there's a real conflict of interest, you have to kind of leave the dais and go leave the meeting and take a seat in the audience or leave the room. This really isn't a conflict of interest in that sense. I don't think, that's not how I read the statute. I think it just means you have to refrain from participating. Although, frankly, it does raise that question, and now I have to get into the more complicated issue of voting. So, and this is always confusing, but so anytime there is a vote that doesn't require an affirmative number of votes, an affirmative majority, meaning a certain number of yeses, whenever the vote, and that would be for most things, actually, and this all goes to how a statute reads. And it's kind of silly that the legislature has been so inconsistent that we have to make up all these rules that go around it. But anytime it's something other than an affirmative vote requiring, say, 8 yeses, a majority or whatever, any voting absent or grunting or not voting at all is counted with the majority if you're sitting at the dais. And so that's the why you remove yourself, because if you're in the meeting, technically your vote is getting counted, it's getting lumped in on the whether it's 8 yeses or 8 noes, whatever the majority is, you're being counted in that majority if you have a non-vote, but you're participating in the meeting. So frankly, I'm kind of talking myself out of what I first said. It probably would be best if someone has a direct interest in liquor who's on the council to remove from the meeting, because otherwise, technically, it's counted as if you're participating on one side or the other of the ledger.
So can I ask a follow-up question on that? So if a restaurant is looking for a variance on something and the liquor license is a separate vote at a separate time, but it's obvious that restaurant is going to be serving liquor at some point, should the alderman just recuse himself from that discussion?
Yes. Right. And so
anything that might eventually be liquor related, you should just not be participating in that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, you can see those things coming.
Yeah.
Right.
So if a restaurant were to come back in after they got their liquor license, say they were going to do an expansion and they wanted to add on they would also have to not, that person would not be able to vote on anything to do with the expansion because it would also include a liquor license for that business. I agree with the stretch, but I think that those are questions that are out there that I think I would feel more comfortable knowing those answers, because I feel like if we say, okay, to get a liquor license for an elected official, here's the box that you're in. And then 6 months from now, that box just got to be huge because you're going to have to step away from A, B, C, D, E, and F, not just A and B.
Yeah, I wouldn't take it quite so far because the statute says a direct interest, not an indirect interest. And if we're just talking about a special use to expand a restaurant,
Okay.
honestly, I don't think that would implicate it. But if it's anything liquor related, changing the liquor code, voting on whether to grant a license or not.
Elliot?
I guess just a kind of a similar follow-up question then. As it pertains to the liquor code, the video gaming is tied to the existence of a liquor license for 1 year. So is that also something that the individual should recuse themselves from?
That's a good question. I'm going to say qualifiedly yes, because you can't have a video gaming license without a liquor license. And only liquor licensees can have video gaming licenses.
One other question I had was, would that also pertain to, I know it's not liquor license related, but it would be for the businesses, if it was in a TIF district or adjacent to a TIF district, would any of that fall underneath a recusal if that had an effect on the businesses because they're in a TIF district or not in a TIF, or adjacent to it? Like if we do streetscape work and we expand the TIF, or we did any of that, would then that preclude that individual from ever voting on anything in that TIF district because it would affect that business?
Are you talking about a business in the TIF district that a council member has an interest in?
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's addressed in the TIF statute.
Okay.
So irrespective of liquor licenses, if you own a business in a TIF district, you cannot participate in any discussion or voting on something that has to do with the TIF district.
That was just a question that I had, that I thought about, trying to look at all the different things, reading through there and thinking back to all the situations I've been part of during the last 15 years that, a lot of that stuff comes up and people have to answer those questions and try to maybe get some of this out there well before we get to the point of making a decision whether or not we're going to allow this, that we try to talk about everything we can, because I think it's important that if we decide that we're going to do this, one, I think it's important that whether it's Abby or anybody else, that people know that that's the reality of what's allowable and what's not.
I want to know, thank you for the memo. It was extremely exhaustive. You did not mention Abby's name. This is not about Abby. This is not about anybody here at this table. I've had discussions with Abby about the project. I was just telling her before the meeting, she wrecked my day off. I was on the phone all day and reading, trying to figure out, because this is it's a somewhat awkward position that the council is in to have to consider, an ordinance regarding ourselves. I called Mayor Burns, who is probably watching on BATV tonight. But Geneva tackled this issue. They had a situation where an alderman or someone who wanted to become an alderman approached the city and said, hey, your ordinances don't allow me to be one. Can you change your ordinance so I can become one? They did. The gentleman did not win the election, so it became sort of a moot point. I spoke with him. So this is Mike Olson of Stockholm, and I said, just looking back on the whole thing, how do you feel about the prohibition of having a license for someone who's a holder? Between my discussion with Mayor Burns and with Mike, what I walked away with was that Mayor Burns made it sound like he somewhat regrets them making the bend. because he thought that it encumbered any prospective alderman, the number of votes that you may not be able to participate in, and it meant that the person from that ward was now disproportionately representing their constituents. So that's a value judgment. It's not a deal breaker, but it's a value judgment. Mike said something probably more important, though, that goes to the heart of the issue. Is he said that if you say any of my remarks from our discussion tonight, I want you to say inclusion. What he meant by that was the opportunity to have anybody participate and serve city government, as many people as we can have serve. Let's do that. So let's break down as many barriers as we can. So he was erring on the side of, yeah, fine, I have a liquor license, but I'm also a committed person. And with all due respect, politicians do not have to go through the vetting process to get their seats. They just need to get a lot of votes. To get a liquor license, you need to pass a background check. And we review these all the time, so I'm assuming that if any alderman at this table applied for one, that they would pass their background check and whatnot. But that said, the only other person that I could think of that would have some firsthand experience would be Laura. You dealt with this in your own household. That your husband is a brewer. I have to ask you, did you ever think about locating here in Batavia?
Only during the 100 times that he asked me, I would possibly bring that up. And no, we did not consider locating the business here, but I think that my position is a little bit unique in that a lot of the departments who would have responsibility for overseeing construction, the review of the license application, actually report to me in their employment. And
So like if there was a
I felt
sting
it
and
was
he
a
got
conflict.
busted for selling, then that would reflect
Yes.
on you at some point. It just goes to the general thing. If we change the ordinance, though, this would affect you. I mean, it
Possibly.
could.
You could choose to do that, or you could just have the change apply to elected officials and still have the limitations on appointed officials and department heads.
I'm just saying, if we're going to have a comprehensive discussion, let's lay it all out. Let's take care of everything, because if
When we were having our internal discussions, the exact same thing came up. When we discussed this tonight, will it be just for elected officials, or will also those other categories of individuals be considered as well? So it's a good question.
Okay. Well, I'm curious, does anyone have any opinion? Newark.
I've got another question. Does this same state law or policy apply to cannabis facilities?
No.
Then there's your answer. Why bother?
Wait, what?
It doesn't apply to cannabis, but it applies to liquor. So I don't understand the difference. Why they would not do it for cannabis.
Why they wouldn't do it for?
Are
you taking moral direction from
Any
Springfield?
one of us could open up a cannabis facility with no questions asked.
Wow.
It's a big, it's a big law with a lot of pages, but I don't remember that being in there.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, but it's no different than, Elliot recused himself tonight from a vote. It's no different. If you have a business interest in anything, we should recuse ourselves. I obviously work for a major employer in Batavia, and if something came up, I would recuse myself from anything regarding that. So I'm in favor.
I would point out that if Elliot, say, was the owner of owner of a business whose contract or something was being addressed, he would need to leave the dais. That was not a conflict of interest of the sort that required that, and just announcing that that there's a conflict and you're not going to vote, in his example, was fine.
Yeah, I agree with bringing it in line with what the state law says. Plain and simple as that. Yes, the fact that it's being brought before us, it's not we're doing it because for any special consideration. The law recently changed. Do we want to change it because of that? I think the more that we would be inconsistent or be consistent with what the state law is, it simplifies it, it makes it understandable. If you have one set of laws, there must be a compelling reason why we would want to keep a more prohibitive restriction. And what would that be? And the only thing that I've ever been hearing is that anyone with it may have to recuse themselves from any votes. And we might not like that, but that ultimately is the decision for that alderman's electors. And that's the only one that person answers to ultimately. How we go about representing our constituents, if you're not here, if you have to recuse yourself, any of those reasons why, you may feel that that person's underrepresenting. But if their people believe that they bring other qualities to the seat that are more important and re-elect that person, that is their choice, that's democracy.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I was going to bring up. I mean, I think that's the thing is, it's not just about the fact that whether you get to vote or not on a liquor license, it's everything else that every one of us does that's not one certain thing. It's dozens or 100 or whatever you want to think of as your own skills and your own things you want to focus on while you're an alderman. And I think that's really much more important to me than whether or not somebody gets to vote on, do we give somebody else a liquor license or a fine? And that's really on the mayor's shoulders as the liquor commissioner on that side.
No, for sure.
But as far as issuing the licenses, if we don't have one vote on it, it is what it is.
And kind of just really quick, I was just going to finish with the part where it's more transparent. You're a business owner, people are going to see that, and they're more informed about, oh, they are taking too much time, or they're not, and it doesn't bother me on how they're going to do it. So I feel that by just going with the way the statute is, it's narrowly crafted as to who can and who can't in the situations, and then then we all know what those expectations are, and that person self-polices themselves. We're going to self-police it. It's all out there. It's completely transparent. People make better informed decisions about who they're voting, and the questions about, well, what do they own and who owns this and who owns that. You kind of put it out there and say, well, they do own it. Re-elect the person, don't re-elect them.
Elliot? Yeah, no, I definitely appreciated the breakdown that was issued here in the memo. Very interesting to read. Certainly, all the parts about who is and who should not have all the direct or indirect interest in the distribution, the sale, et cetera. So I definitely appreciated that. I respect the fact that it was obviously a remnant of older law that has since been updated at a different level. But I similar, I think, to what Mark was trying to say with the cannabis, I kind of look at this as any other business. Unless we're willing to sit here and list out every single other business that we need to try and make sure that we stipulate, if you have this, then you need to recuse. If you have this, that's going to be an exhaustive list that we will never complete. It is kind of on the honor system. We need to recognize that we all have a stake in something somewhere. Mine happens to be in telecommunications industry, right? And somebody else is going to be banking, and if there's facade improvements or TIF districts, that you're operating within, then yeah, it's on the honor system to declare it and probably abstain yourself from voting, if not recuse yourself completely. But there's a different mechanism for holding that accountability. So,
For sure.
yeah.
It occurred to me after listening to all four of you, had she proposed a dispensary, we would have gotten a different memo from the mayor.
Dan, just really
Sure.
quick. And if anybody really wanted to deal with it in the state legislature, they would remove the conflict of interest from creating tax law and then figuring out your firm is being able to get out.
For sure. Gunnar?
Yeah, I've had some, I know some people in other parts of the region that this has already happened at. Over in River Grove, the mayor is a friend of mine, and the mayor is the owner of a bar, I guess that we called the Underpass. It's on Grand Avenue in Franklin Park. And so the mayor of River Grove owns a bar in Franklin Park under the underpass, which is a pretty prominent spot if you know anything about Franklin Park. So when this all came up, I was at a meeting, and he's on the bus board with me, so I see him every month. And so I told him I had an alderman that was thinking about wanting to open up a restaurant, which I think is a great idea at a neat location. It'd be part of, kind of a new spark plug in the downtown area. And I said, what's your reaction to having, when you went through this? He says, I think the thing you have to appreciate is, he says, I specifically have to run about as tight a ship as I possibly can. Because he says, if something happens in my bar, even though I'm not in Franklin Park, I'm the mayor of River Grove, he says, I'm going to be on the front page of every local newspaper. It's going to be on the radio. I'm just going to be, he says, the penalty from just the publicity of it, because I'm the liquor license holder and this happened in my place and I'm a public official and I've taken an oath of office. I've really set myself personally up for the conflict that I've got to personally manage and understand how to do it and avoid the problems with it. So he says, really the actual jurisdiction or the control over it rests with the individual. He says, if somebody wants to go out there and be stupid enough to go open up a liquor license and then run kind of a shoddy place, he says, you talk about putting yourself into ruination. You're just going to drive yourself right into the ground real quick. He says, on the other side of the coin, he says, I bend over backwards to, bring in special people that need a night in their honor for raising money because their child's having an operation, or somebody that's you want to pay some tribute to. He says, I bend over backwards to be a community face in Franklin Park and River Grove, that my place is open to do nice public things. And he says, it's working. He says, I just have to be real careful about that we don't do anything. He says, you better believe I check every ID 2 or 3 times when they come into my place, because I'm not about to get stung by a police sting, by the state police to come. He says, I'm sure they've probably been in there and tried me on it. So he says, I'm going to keep as tight a ship as I can, because my whole business, my whole life is dependent on me behaving myself and having my business behave himself. So I think, I think we all know Abby and know that she probably, I'm sure, will have the same values as she embarks on this idea. So this is something I'm certainly not going to go home and lose any sleep about, because I think we know her good enough, and we know her background, we know her family. I handed out to you that article about her grandfather. And we conflicted the night between this and the signs, because her grandfather gets the credit for pushing to push the first city limit signs up in Batavia. So, I think we got something here we don't need to worry about, my personal opinion.
One other question, I guess, for Kevin, just again, my mind's spinning on the reach and extent of something like this. Currently, our liquor tax would not apply here because it's a restaurant selling alcohol, right? So if there was a discussion about raising the liquor tax, she would not be expected to abstain from that conversation.
Oh, I don't know why
Yeah,
not.
right. Yeah, no, she would, because
She is a
that
pecuniary
affects
So I
her.
just want
in that decision.
Anything to do with liquor.
We're asking if she wants
Well,
to pay more as a business.
right.
This is where I'm going, though.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make sure I understand the full breadth of this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the same might be true while we don't have this. We've seen a neighboring community at one point put on a restaurant tax, right?
Right.
Now, if those two are things that she would need to, or any alderman for that
Yeah.
matter, would need to recuse themselves,
Right.
would that not also apply to the full city budget if a conditional increase in those taxes were to be a part of it?
That's actually a good point, and it goes beyond. Now, this discussion goes beyond the liquor code provision, and it gets into the general conflict of interest issues. So anytime anybody on the council, if you have an interest that is different than the entire council, if your interest is impacted uniquely, that's a conflict. And that's where you need to say, hey, this impacts me, so I need to step aside and not participate in the discussion or vote. So this goes way beyond really the liquor code into any circumstance where a decision that comes before the council is going to impact a council member personally, uniquely, differently from the way it would impact all the other council members. That's kind of a good litmus test. If my interest is different than everyone else's, I have a conflict. I mean, just because everyone has a home in the city doesn't mean that you can't vote on taxes. Everybody has a, home in the city, yeah, so that's a good kind of test.
Anyone else? So I was gonna say, you haven't had a chance to weigh in on this. In my original discussion with you, I told you right away. I said this isn't for me. I couldn't do this. I have a dream of opening a bar someday. I'll probably do it in another country, but I would not ever think to do it in my own hometown. Tell us about your plan. Tell us about what's going on.
This was not my plan either, or my dream timing. And I really appreciate all of you for entertaining this tonight and for your thoughtful commentary and before and during this meeting. And we'll obviously respect whatever outcome of the discussion, whatever direction it goes. And I'm glad you brought up earlier, Marty, that we don't make a vote for one person. And I think of all of the people out in the city, restaurant owners or grocery store owners or gas station owners that could run for city council now, or possibly could in the future. And so yes, so this property has been in my family since the 70s when my dad did the remodel and built what you see there today. My parents actually met in that building, so it's actually where I come from. And the tenant that's been there for the past 16 years now has been a great tenant to my mom, who's now the landlord, and has been on five-year cycles, and had shown no interest in stopping or had given no notice of not renewing his lease, which was coincided right with the election last year. And then he told my mom, instead of the usual 5-year renewal, I think I'll just do 1 year and then I'm going to retire, which threw me a little bit because I thought if this dream that we've had kind of baking in the background of what a cool spot, my mom owns it, great landlord, would love to do something great for the city and redevelop that corner into cool restaurant and bar, which the food and the beverage is really my husband's passion. The Batavia redevelopment is more my passion, but combined, I think it's going to be it could be a really great project. But this was also my dream, so I just ignored that 1-year deadline there for a little bit because I wanted to put this first and thought, there's a lot that has to fall into place before I could really pursue that or even entertain the idea of having this experience. And then all of those things started falling into place nicely. And so this was the next step, was to bring this up in front of all of you. So again, I thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any more specific questions, but that's just kind of the general timeline on how I've arrived here.
Yeah, and I'd like to comment on some of the stuff that Marty was saying. Right now, the way our law is, we are expanding our liquor licenses. And we have a lot of great people that we are prohibiting from running for office because they do have a liquor license. And some of those business owners that have the liquor license are a mainstay in our community. And I think they would do nothing but help us.
That's what I was going to say. The code as it is now, it's exclusionary, and as we expand, we're excluding more and more people, whether they be our successors or our challengers. I don't see it as the code as it is still appropriate. Do you happen to know, Kevin, when that was adopted?
No,
I do.
guess is probably
1934.
34?
Prohibition.
Okay.
Right after Prohibition.
I would note that the reason that there's an exception for cities under a certain size is because cities, smaller cities, have fewer people to poll from, and there's more of a likelihood that you would have people that have aspirations to public service and, a willingness to serve who might be, liquor license holders or something. So there's a balance between, allowing a small city to be well-served by its citizens, and in having that, there's a threshold above which the legislature is saying, okay, well, there's a big enough pool, for a larger city that we can hold that prohibition there, but lift it for the smaller cities. That's the reasoning.
So our code as it is goes against that
Yeah, it goes beyond what it needs to.
at a time when we're expanding liquor licenses.
I would also add that if the council is going to entertain changing the liquor code from this point forward, Abby shouldn't participate in the discussion. At a Cal level, it's okay to be at the dais because it's not a decision-making mode, but when it comes before the council, you would need to recuse yourself. And you can go take a seat in the audience, and then you're just an audience member for a time. And the minutes should note at that point that,
She exited the meeting.
Abby Beck left the meeting, and then Abby Beck returned to the meeting. It's, so that, is how it should be accounted for.
So if we were to do a straw poll or make a motion to direct staff, would Abby excuse herself from that point tonight?
I think it would be good that she would, yes.
I think it'd be best if we're going to even entertain moving it forward. I think that would be the way to do it. So that way, from the beginning of or the next step in the discussion, we follow that rule.
Well, I for one, I will say I definitely appreciate the discussion we had tonight. For me, I actually walked into this meeting, as I shared with Abby, very much so against this. I did not think it was a good idea, and I said it was not for me. If I were faced with this decision, I wouldn't be choosing between opening a business or choosing between serving on a council. But after listening to everybody, I recognize why inclusion makes more sense. So why waste any time? I guess I would say, I would make a motion that we direct staff to update the ordinance to allow public officials and have it mirror the state law.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second. Do we need to take a roll call?
Discussion? Do we want to have it as the full part of state law where, does state law
mirror the
State law, no, I would be able to,
So
my husband would be able
anybody-
to have a brewery in town.
Okay.
And I don't want that, but your future city
Well,
administrator
we've
may.
never made laws for just one person.
Well, but I think it says specifically law enforcing, so it's still the police chief, police officers, contrary to like all the Chicago Fire, they all seem to own a bar on those TV shows.
Right.
So I guess that was my thing,
Yeah.
is do we want to just go with the mirror to the state law,
Yeah.
or do we want to exclude department heads
That makes more
or
sense.
anything? Just leave it as the state law is written, just go there.
I'm sorry,
And
Laura.
so, just so that you know, then what the state law also doesn't prohibit is indirect interest. So, even if you were mayor or an alderman, your spouse could.
Right. That's right.
And that's, I just want to make sure that we got that all out there, so that way, that's what everybody is okay with, and we move that forward. And honestly, I think, it has to be a decision that you make as that person, no matter who it is, because, like the mayor said, you take yourself from whatever standard you set to become an alderman or as an alderman, and you put that bar up just a little bit higher once you do that. And, again, in this case, I think we've got somebody that's much more involved in many, many, many other things that doesn't bother me.
We're lucky in this case because we have a qualified, wonderful
Right. It's not
opportunity here. But
Can I-
that's not why we're making the decision tonight.
No.
So.
Just a quick question. If another mayor was to want to open, that person then could never be the liquor commissioner.
Correct.
It would have to be.
You have a board.
Right.
Like a board.
Yeah. I believe it would be an alderman who would step into that role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just so that we were clear on that part.
Yes.
Not that you're opening a bar anytime soon.
But the
Serving
way we're
ginger ale.
changing it, Linda could open a bar, and he could still be the liquor commissioner.
That's right.
Could be.
That would make for.
Do we want to
interesting
take
discussions.
a roll call, or does it just voice vote? Does it matter?
So at this point,
Because we have to
I
show
think
that someone's not
if
voting.
you
don't
wanted
we?
to just do the voice, and Kevin, you can tell me what would be appropriate, but I thought a voice vote is fine now because what you're really doing
Yeah.
is directing staff to
Yep.
bring you a new
To bring us an
ordinance.
But we need
change
to,
that.
have we accounted then in the notes that,
We already had
Okay.
that in there that Abby left. Does it have the time?
Is that back screen on or not? Can you see
9:02.
it? No.
Yes.
Abby left at 9:02.
Okay, so all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. We should probably talk about this.
Well, it's not gonna be
Well,
on the
not
agenda
until
until we have.
Oh, yeah, when we have it.
vote on
Right.
They'll come back to Cow.
We'll see
We'll
it, we'll
talk
see it.
about it. Abby will excuse herself again, or recuse herself, and then we'll talk about it. If we're happy with it, we'll move it to city council, where again, Abby will recuse herself while we talk about it and pass it. And then,
It would just mean no liquor licenses will ever go on consent agenda.
It's
One less thing for me to read? I'm okay with that.
now, see, I think
No.
it's a
Is-
conflict of interest
Is
for
that
Dan.
true,
because-
or can she leave during the consent agenda? Then she's not voting on everything else in the
Yes,
consent
actually,
agenda, though.
Laura's right. It has to be, I mean, you don't always have all aldermen here for a consent agenda, so it's all the aldermen present have to vote for it. So, yes. So we're still good.
And a historical count of all the liquor license votes have all been unanimous. Can you imagine if we appointed a bar owner who was the one person who voted no every time? I don't think we're ever going to have that situation. So I hope you don't start that. Okay. Thank you. It was a great discussion. Never again.
Boardwalk Empire.
Okay, then we'll move on to project status.
Under project status, I would like to bring up a topic that, an opportunity that came to us actually last Friday. We received a call from a commercial real estate broker who has two different clients who are looking for a place to establish craft cannabis growing facilities. And a craft grower is one who has no more than 5,000 square feet of growing space. They may apply to the state for increases of 3,000 square feet up to 14,000 square feet. But the unique thing between a craft grower and a cultivation center is, in addition to growing, they may also be an infuser and/or a transporter of cannabis products, as so long as they obtain those other licenses. Currently, in our zoning code, in the GI and LI districts, we allow cultivation centers. However, while we do have the definition of craft grower, infuser, and transporter in our definitions, by virtue of the fact that they are not listed as an allowable use in GI and LI, they are therefore not permitted. And so in order for these businesses to locate within the city of Batavia in the GI and LI district, it would require a text amendment to our zoning code. And so I'm bringing this up tonight because it is not something that was on our agenda for discussion. I can take a straw poll tonight, and if you are indicating to me that you are generally favorable toward including those as allowable uses, then we will begin the process of the text amendment going to the Plan Commission first, and then back to Committee of the Whole and through City Council.
Can I add a statement?
Yes, please.
As a general zoning matter, we could not exclude a use by simply not including it.
It's specific, we actually have a sentence in there that says if it is not included,
Right.
and if it's in the definitions, then it's excluded. And there's another paragraph that said if it's not listed at all in our zoning code, and it's similar to a use that's allowable, then it allows the Director of Community Development to make the judgment as to whether that is an allowable use or not.
There's some general case law that says that, for instance, if we didn't want a tattoo parlor anywhere in the city, that we simply wouldn't we wouldn't include it as an allowed use, and therefore we exclude it, and the case law says you can't do that.
Okay.
If it's a legal business.
Mhm.
So that, with cannabis, there's a little twist in there because the legislature did allow municipalities to exclude them.
Right.
But as a general zoning matter, if it's a lawful business, you can't have a strategy of excluding by not allowing it anywhere. Just a little note, little twist on.
Does that
zoning.
mean you would have to allow any business
Well,
somewhere?
What it means is if you haven't allowed it in any of your districts, is that someone could apply in any district, and you would have to treat it on a ad hoc basis. Which, so that's why a lot of times all of those, like, you lump it all into the, I-1 or something, or, you lump it into a zoning category where it would, something that you haven't thought of would have the least impact, perhaps. Yeah,
Deny by exclusion.
exactly, right. That's what the case law says.
Okay, so maybe our zoning code is not written in an appropriate manner to begin with, and maybe we should start from there?
Well, it might open us up to someone saying, hey, you didn't include my, underwater basket weaving business, and I want to locate it in residential district because, it needs to go somewhere.
Okay.
That's what it opens us up to.
Okay. So we will definitely review that aspect of our zoning code, but I think the safest measure in the case where our straw poll tonight gives me a indication that you would like to have this as an allowable use. The simplest way to do that for these particular businesses is to have it specifically listed as the allowable use. That takes away any question as to whether or not it would be allowed.
It would be, they'd be allowable, it would be conditional use, or how would we do it? Because the grow facilities right now, are they a conditional use?
No,
As a
they're an
cultivation center,
allowable
they're
use.
allowed use.
Mhm.
Pharmaceutical.
Right. But I thought the cultivation center. that's
Is
not-
all.
But that's just for medical?
No,
It's for-
cultivation center is for
in
all.
total, so it could be for recreational or medical.
Yes.
These folks want to do a little bit more than just.
Right, and I understand that, but what I'm saying is if we're gonna do that, I just wanna know, is it just become an allowable use and it, whatever zoning area it fits in, that's where it goes? Or is it conditional use where we would have to approve it in those areas?
You could have it be either. So
Oh, that's what I think.
the staff is going to bring the, it as, an allowable use. And either at the plan commission stage or when it comes to committee of the whole, you could decide to instead make it a conditional use.
Because like the cultivation centers or a dispensary, they are set up by state law where they can be located, certain distances from schools.
Correct.
And the other things that we have to abide by.
Mhm.
And so that's something I think that we get to that point, that's also things we have to make sure we review and make sure that we have where we want them.
Right.
Your Honor?
Yeah, I obviously was included in this conversation that Laura had with you earlier, and reflecting on this and talking to a couple of other mayors in the area about their problems or issues in this whole thing. I guess I would caution the council to take any action on this right at the moment, given the fact that we have gone public here and said that we're going to have a referendum in November as to whether or not we're going to allow sale of cannabis in the city of Batavia. And I guess we haven't made the final decision if it's going to be advisory or binding, but we've told everybody we're going to have this. And now suddenly we're here throwing some more stuff into the conversation. And, you've asked the community to make a decision about whether or not you want it or don't want it. But suddenly now we're kind of complicating it with some new ideas of some other things that we may want to do. And I'm not sure we're sending the right message. It's kind of like, so I can hear somebody saying, well, the city council's talking out of both sides of its mouth down there.
I don't see that.
These are the ones that use the electricity. We want these.
Well, and this is something we already talked about and we allowed for the cultivation centers, regardless of whether or not we were going to allow, or whether or not the public allows us to sell or
Dispensary.
invite people to have a dispensary here to sell this.
But you got a
on
little bit
retail
more than a
basis.
cultivation center going here.
Right, I get that. But this is at the wholesale level. This is not part of or distribution network. This is not part of selling it to the general public.
I can't knock on their door and buy their stuff there. We'd have to grant them a dispensary license for them to sell out of their factory.
Right.
It's not like
And if
showing up.
if the citizens say no dispensaries, then this place could only do what they do and send it to North Aurora, Geneva, St. Charles, anywhere else that has a dispensary.
And to the mayor's point, I thought we were all on the same page. I thought we were doing a binding
Right.
referendum
Right.
on the dispensaries.
That's all it is
Because
about.
we want the electric money, we're gonna make a decision on dispensary
Well, I
separate,
don't know
so
if we made that real clear, though.
I thought we
I
did.
thought-
I thought we
I
did.
think we made that crystal
Binding
clear.
referendum? I thought that's what we said.
And I think we made that clear when we approved the cultivation facilities before. It's not just about whether we sell electricity or whether we sell water. It's about jobs. It's about keeping our industrial park full in the buildings that we have out there. So this is way beyond whether or not we allow somebody to sell it
I apologize. for
medically or recreationally in this town.
I was being glib.
There's two laws that passed. The first one was the medical use and all the
Right.
grow facilities
Right.
at that point. The part that we then had to say in was as it related to recreation. That's it. So the going forward, we were saying that the binding referendum would be for allowing recreational dispensaries in town. The other stuff was already allowed 3 years ago by state law for that. There was no opt-out. There was no, those decisions. Those were zoning decisions that were made at that point. This could have been a zoning, but it was also taken to the level of a policy because the state kind of allowed for that to happen at that point.
I guess I'd like to ask the city attorney to review our minutes in the state law and tell us whether or not we're all talking on the same page here.
Oh, I think it's crystal clear. The only thing that we said we were gonna go to referendum for was whether or not we allow a dispensary in this town.
Yes.
A recreational dispensary. That's it.
That's my recollection as well.
And that's all that will be on the referendum that goes out.
I mean, did we specifically say that at a meeting? Is
I
that,
guarantee you that's what we said.
Is that in the minutes?
Very
I'm
simple.
sure we can find it.
Oh, can you,
It was, in fact, actually, after the discussion was over, I had specifically asked out loud, does that mean that we're putting the mayor in a position where he may have to veto something that is the will of the people? I
well,
felt
the
that
mayor
that,
won't be vetoing anything that's the will of the people. But I'm just saying that, this mayor at least,
I understand that. We have not discussed
Jenny
that.
might have the minutes.
Yeah, the motion summary from the January 14th, 2020 meeting does say, the committee asked staff to work with legal counsel to formulate a question on whether or not to allow recreational cannabis dispensaries in Batavia to be placed on the November ballot. The consensus of the committee was in favor of making this a binding referendum. And I'm currently still working on the minutes. But that
I
was
guess
from the
I'm just
motion
wondering
summary.
if what is being proposed to us now may be a little bit more than just a growing station.
Correct. and that has
It's
nothing to do with-
infusing and transportation as well, but not a dispensary. Both of these
They
facilities.
can make the product, they can supercharge it with something, but they can't sell it to the general public there.
Right, they would be
need to
selling
sell
to
some.
dispensaries.
It has to go out to a dispensary, whether it's in Batavia or anywhere else. It can't be sold from the facility that is being proposed.
No benefit of sales tax because there's not actually a sale happening there.
And all of those things were approved, signed into law 3 years ago.
When we updated the definitions.
Right.
Yeah.
For the approval for the grow
Medical.
facilities.
For medical.
Yeah, because I was just looking at the Laura's memo to us, even just framing not just what the memo was, but the whole discussion was whether to allow recreational cannabis dispensaries, narrowly focused, and the motion reflects that. So all night, the entire discussion was about recreational solely. I know it was brought up, well, we have these other uses that were already approved, medical dispensaries. It does not affect those. That was pointed out.
No one's knocked on our door
We
yet.
don't need an amendment here then.
We need an
You're
amendment
right.
for the type of grow.
Right. We have definitions in the back of the zoning code for craft grower, infuser, and transporter, but the only allowable use is cultivation center.
the only use that's called out in a the only
Yes.
particular use that's called out for a particular district.
Which could actually, it sounds like could be challenged because of the way we wrote it. So yeah, let's fix that.
Yeah, but I think the cannabis law allows municipalities, well, actually, I guess that, we'd have to go look at that. Is it to refuse dispensaries or any cannabis?
Having a few meetings is cheaper than getting sued, so we should probably.
There's also a question I know, because I talked with Roman about this, and I'm not sure what his research was, whether we can make it binding or not. We might not be able to make
Right.
a binding referendum.
Yeah, he's still completing the research on that and getting that
Yeah.
back to me.
So we have to weigh in on that. Obviously, that's what you want to do, is make it binding. So if we can do that, then, we'll confirm that. But there's a question as to whether we actually can. Only certain referendums can be binding, and not every referendum can be binding.
If you flip the wording on it, would that allow us to make it binding? Maybe that's, oh God, I don't want to get into one of those.
Well, we'll weigh in on that. We're looking at it, and I'm not sure. Roman's doing that research, so I'm in the dark right now. I don't know where we stand.
Because that was sort of the will of this group here, is that we wanted it.
Right.
Be binding.
It won't be up to us,
No,
but
it won't be.
we'll figure it out.
Awkward.
Okay, so, as a straw poll, would you direct staff to present a request for a text amendment to the Plan Commission that would make craft grower, infuser, and transporter allowable uses in the GI and LI districts?
I would say yes.
Okay, then we'll move that.
Well, we're on that subject, as I hear the word transporter there. Is not a cultivation center have to have some type of transport to get it out of the facility to?
They do, but they, because they grow it in such large quantities, my understanding is that they're not allowed to do that themselves, that the cultivation center and a transporter
Are
have to be
separate.
two separate entities.
So if
Whereas
there
we're
was a
dealing with such small quantities here,
Oh,
that
they
the
can do
state
it.
does allow the craft grower to also be a transporter.
Only in Illinois. Only in Illinois. So if you got a truckload of it, you have to have somebody else do it, but if you got a trunk full of it, you can do it yourself.
So in order to be a transporter,
standard, right?
there are all kinds of requirements, what the vehicle security systems
System-
have
yeah,
to be.
I
So-
joke about it, but
Yeah.
I guess that's the strange thing to me, is the way that sounds. That's what it sounds like.
I think they were trying to get away from, trying to not make transportation cost prohibitive for the craft grower.
Okay.
But that opens up a door for the cultivation center to be able to utilize this place as a transporter.
Right, so you could
We could have-
basically have multiple businesses in town that work together to go from start to finish,
Mm-hmm.
which I think, to me, is one of the goals I'd like to see, because it's a big business in the state. It's already over, $40 million
And
in
growing.
the first month, and, something we just want to turn our back on and ignore. I mean, I think it's a lot more than just the possible tax revenue that we have. It's another industry.
Entrepreneurship.
Okay.
Entrepreneurship, small business.
Anything else on that topic? Any questions or advice, concerns? The only other thing that I'd like to bring up under project status is, as you know, we have several huge street reconstruction and water projects this year. One of them is Main Street reconstruction, which is all the way from South Water Street to Van Nortwick. And the Public Works Department is going to be hosting an open house right here in this room on February 18th that begins at 5:30 prior to our city council meeting that evening. So just want to invite you all to attend that if you're interested. And we'll be sending out postcards to everybody that lives in the area to invite them to that meeting, as well as publicizing it on social media, as well as our weekly e-blast.
think the postcards already are out, so I think I got one at
Good.
home. I also wanted to mention or ask, there was a note about February 11th having a meeting out of Public Works before, and I want to bring that up again tonight so we wouldn't forget, before the next COW meeting.
So,
Right, the 11th?
jump in. It's really just, it's before the start of the official committee meeting. So we'll be back here to City Hall at 7 to start the official
Right.
committee meeting.
Yeah.
So really, it's just a tour for city council members to come out and look at the changes that have been made at Public Works prior to the COW meeting. So around 6 o'clock or so that evening, we plan to be out there. That'll give us a little time then to get back here before 7 o'clock for the start of the meeting.
Okay. We have the new wing plow out, too, so we can see that.
Actually, we can have that out. Yeah, the improvements in the building
Snowing.
are about 90% done. They're not fully done, but they're good enough for you guys to come out and look at them. But yeah, we can also
Okay.
make sure the wing plow is,
And will Brett Wing be demonstrating the wing plow?
I don't know.
That's mine. Why did you use that? Any others? Marty?
Joe brought up an interesting thought when he was talking about the police officer and the, can the savings from here go to there and so on and so forth. Which then got me thinking, can we have a collection of data points? Can we have a running total of those things that we know came in under budget? It's this much, maybe quarterly report saying through this quarter, we had items at $500,000 were budgeted, and to date, we're 400,000, or 100,000 under, so that if we're looking at something, obviously I do know that things change over the quarters, but if we keep a running total of this stuff, if the budget amendment for the police officers brought in August, and we know kind of what's still pending, we might not have to have that as a budget amendment, or we can make more informed decisions about where. So maybe just
So we do, in the monthly budget reports that are produced for the second city council meeting in the following month, keep a running total of where all of the budgets, both from a department level, and then also each one of the line items for the different accounts associated with that department, exactly where things are sitting. And I keep a close tab on that, where, first quarter, is it looking like 25%? If it's 75%, does that mean because the projects in that particular line item were front-loaded in the year?
Right.
So yes, we do have that information available. If you find that inadequate and you'd like to suggest something more than that, I can talk to Peggy about whether our current ERP system is capable of producing
No, I
that.
think more along the lines of during one of your administrator reports, just to give a quick update.
Sure.
At the end of the quarter.
Sounds
Just
good.
one of those, and
Even
Is
part of
there
our
dedicate,
quarterly.
5 minutes
also?
to it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
It just takes time to read.
the monthly report is about 120 pages long, so it goes into extreme detail. You're gonna love it.
Could we just,
I mean, just from a high level, like,
Right.
here's what we are from, what we were expecting to get in revenue, and here's where we're at with revenue, and
Yes.
then here's what we had budgeted for expenses and where we're at with expenses.
That's
without-
in there.
Could we-
without having to go through that report
Or just that we're talking about it.
could we just include this in our quarterly assessment of where we're at with the strategic plan?
Yeah.
Might be a convenient time to just be keeping those numbers in mind. Last night I thought, I heard there was going to be a meeting today about One North Washington. Any update on that one?
It's Thursday.
Thursday, pardon. Thank you.
Mark?
I'm nothing if not persistent. Marty, you mentioned before, we don't make laws for one. However, we do have a variance process for when somebody needs to do something with their house that is going to be a variance, and we often vote things for one. So I don't know if anybody wants to reconsider their position on it. I'm not necessarily expecting that. However, it gives me pause because I know there's a resident that is going to be asking for a variance, and I don't know of a variance we've turned down yet, to be honest, especially if they're beautifying their property or they're doing something. But this is the same kind of thing. It's a variance to our parking policy. And so it's been stewing a little bit with me because it's a little frustrating because we do that all the time to help out a resident with their property when they want to make an improvement, and we change the law for that, and that's permanent. So,
And that's where, if we want to open up put it in so that we know that there's a variance process for those type of things, I wouldn't have a problem with that, because then it would clarify those times where we do know what the guidelines for it, because guidelines are part of the variance process. For this, we don't have a variance process, so we would be creating something for it.
but we do. They can bring it to council. Council is the approver of a change in the policy for parking.
And we didn't approve the variance tonight.
That's exactly what we did.
And we have not approved variances in the past. I mean, it was much more prevalent when I first got on the council. That wasn't even a word that got uttered in these chambers. It didn't make it to council meetings for a variance. It very rarely, if ever, got out of a committee meeting. So things have changed. I will admit that.
I'm just, in my time here, I just haven't seen it.
Right.
And we're lenient when somebody's going to do something and they're doing it for the better good of their property or something. And so this is somebody, again, that is looking to be a resident here, and maybe this turns him to say, you know what, never mind. It's just not worth
Well, I look at it and I think, and the chief's comment kind of brought that home to me, was there's obviously been some accommodation made somehow. And I think that that's really...
In this case, it itself...
Right, and I think that that's something that, you look around more and you find the one neighbor that only has one car out in the driveway, and can I park on that side of your driveway?
That happens in my cul-de-sac.
I'll plow your driveway all winter long because I can park my car over in your driveway. Or you have an extra garage space over here, can I rent that for the winter to park my convertible in? I mean, I know it happens a lot, and I think that's, to me, a better option than us saying, you can park your car out in the street, and then every one of us in the next 6 months gets somebody, hey, I want to park my kid's car out in the street while they're home. I just...
And the way it's written, and the reason it came to me is because the police said, go and talk to your alderman. So that's why he reached out to me. So that's the process. Just bring it to your alderman if they want to make an exception, if they want to make a variance. So we just have to be careful how we treat it, because we're saying that, no, we don't make exceptions for one, but we do all the time.
Should we tighten up the language then, being more specific on why a variance would be issued in this case? Would that be more helpful?
It might be that we have something there, but I think it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, if it is for medical reasons, doesn't the chief then have the ability to grant that?
And it's what medical reasons? If you need a piece of equipment parked on your driveway that has to be there because of a medical situation, and that's why you end up in the street, that's, extraordinary.
Sure.
So I just think that we don't get many of these, so I think that the process works. I don't think it's broken.
There is another thing to consider with, kind of due respect. Somebody going through a variance process has to notify all their neighbors, expend some money. We're making a decision, and we didn't have even the presentation of that before us to come down and say, this is really important to me.
Yeah. He has other obligations, that's why he couldn't, so.
And if at a certain point, if we're just kind of talking it amongst ourselves, that kind of, then why don't I just make some calls? And I know, it's I got a guy, and I don't really have to, it's not really a hardship because I don't really have to show up for anything. I don't have to do anything. It's a company car is another swaying factor. If the company is going to issue cars, maybe they need to incur the cost of paying for an off-site storage. There's other factors that need to be weighed, and those kind of things we need to hear from a petitioner too.
I feel for the guy. I do. I also feel for my neighbor who has 3 cars and can't fit them on that little tiny strip of pavement, which is unfortunate. I have one other I'm going to be missing from like 3 or 4 meetings coming up here. I'm going to be out of town, so I need your help presenting a couple of things at a couple of cows. And then I'm spending Valentine's weekend in Fargo to experience negative 20-degree weather on the coldest month of the year.
Silly.
Because I miss my friends, so I won't be able to make that meeting either. So, and then who's bringing popcorn on Tuesday or the
Right. It's actually, lunch will be served.
Lunch is served, okay. Good deal.
Because we planned it over the lunch hour to
Cool.
people.
It's not a tutorial, Dan.
Trying to get ideas. Debit cards for everyone.
Those can be locked down.
Okay.
Motion-
No others?
Motion to adjourn.
Then, motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, motion by Chansit, second by Meitzler. All those in favor?
Aye.
And thank you for another good, great discussion meeting tonight.